Yeah, the month.
Hafaday, good evening. Thank you all for being here. This informational briefing by the Committee on Housing, Utilities, Public Safety, and Homeland Security is now called to order. It is now 5:30. For the record and in accordance with 5 GCA Chapter 8, subsection 8107, notices were sent out via email to all senators and all main media broadcasting outlets on February 8, 2017, and the second notice on February 13, 2017. With me today are Senators Regine Biscoli and Senator Michael Signicolas. Thank you, Senators, for being here. Expanded state. The purpose of this informational briefing is to help the committee and the general public to understand issues of concern regarding water rates and quality of service. This is the third of a series of meetings. During last week's briefing, the CCU GWA officials briefed the committee and public on their presentation in San Francisco to Fitch Ratings, discussions with US EPA addressing water leaks, and information on the ongoing line replacement project and the system pressure zone realignment program. Today, we will continue discussion based on information the committee has received from GWA from the last two informational briefings. We will hear from the witnesses, and the order of questions will be, I will ask my questions, invite the senators also to inquire, and the committee will then have their chance to respond. We have with us today is the General Manager of GWA, Mr. Miguel Bordalio, our CCU Chairman, Mr. Joey Duenas, and our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Greg Cruz. Okay. Thank you for being here this evening. Would you like some water? Would you like some water or coffee? Too?
No, I brought my own water.
Okay, okay. Okay. So what we're basically going to do is we have I have some questions prepared from the exhibit you submitted on our last informational briefing that you weren't able to attend because you had some other obligations. So thank you for coming today, Mr. Bordalio.
You're welcome, Senator.
Okay. So we're just going to get straight into the meat of it, and the first thing we're going to discuss is the round of borrowing. So from my understanding, GWA is preparing to go out and borrow towards the end of the year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And specifically, what projects are covered by the next bond issuance? And you can just take your time to explain, no rush.
Specifically, the bulk of the funds that are to be borrowed for the next bond issuance will go the big ticket items will be primarily the reservoir replacement program or projects. Don't have a detailed list or a copy of our CIP, but out of the approximately 67 or so million, I think about half of that is intended to go towards the revenue replacement program. I can provide more detail with specific CIP line items after the hearing at a later date.
Oh, yeah, okay, that would be nice. So you said of 67 million, so you anticipate in going out to borrow at the end of the year 67 million?
That's our estimate at this time, yes.
Okay. And you mentioned that the projects that you're going to cover is for CIP project. Is that the court-ordered projects?
The CIP program are all of our capital improvement projects. The reservoir program specifically is a court-ordered project, so yes, it will address them, but not all of the projects in the CIP are court-ordered projects. We are 93.5% complete with our court-ordered projects at this time.
3.5%. And yes, so if you could please provide us a breakdown on specifically what you'll be covering with the next bond issuance.
Yes, ma'am.
The 2.35 debt service ratio sufficient for the next round of borrowing. Will this include raising rates for consumers?
I'm sorry, could you I
Repeat?
missed
Okay,
the first
sure,
part of
sure.
that.
Is the 2.35 debt service ratio sufficient for the next round of borrowing without raising rates for the consumer?
I think I'll defer that one to the
Mr.
CFO.
Greg
but I
Cruz?
believe it is.
Okay.
Based on our financial, our 5-year projections for the 2018 anticipated borrowing, we are looking at approximately, in gross borrowing, about $90 million to generate about $70 million for capital projects, net of all costs. So it's actually 70 is what we're looking at for the next borrowing. This is for construction projects. Gross borrowing would be 90 million, but there are costs associated with borrowing. So when you net out those costs, I mean, our estimate is it's going to bring it down to about 70. In terms of the debt service coverage, the bond indenture requires a 1.25 debt service coverage, and the PUC has their own rate covenant, which is 1.75. So yes, the 2.3 would be more than sufficient to meet the requirements of both the PUC and the indenture. Oh no, but your question was more specific towards whether or not the rate increase is necessary to maintain the 2.3. There are other components involved in the rate increase that we project for next year, which is the 4%. There's also some reserves. We have a reserve policy that was approved by the CCU, and part of that excess or that additional coverage that you're seeing above the 1.75 goes to cover these reserves. We have a working capital reserve or an O&M reserve. That's what we refer to. We also have a internal capital project reserve, and we also have a debt service reserve set aside specifically to deal with the PUC's requirement of 1.75. So some of that excess coverage is to cover or to fund those reserves that
So there's 3 reserves you
there's
said.
3 reserves, yes.
You have your O&M, your internal, and your debt service.
Correct.
And can you tell me how much is in each reserve? Or tell the public?
As of today, there's approximately $13 million in our O&M reserve, another $8 million in our debt service reserve, and in internal capex, capital expenditure reserve fund, we have another 11 million. So that's 35. Sure. In our O&M reserve, we have approximately 13 million. In our debt service reserve, we have another 11 million. I'm sorry. And the internal capital reserve fund, we also have another 11 million. So that's 13, 11, and 11, 22. So that's about 35 overall total reserves.
I'd like to just add to that, Madam Chairman, that we set rates based on cost of service. So what we have is a 5-year rate plan that projects out rates based on what we believe will be the expenditures at the time, the debt service at the time, and the revenues that will be generated at the time. So in May is when we start to put together our plan to give to the PUC for what we call a true-up. And so therefore, we can't project to you right now, rates will be going up, rates will be going down, rates will be staying flat, because we haven't done that exercise yet. Now, as we go through the year, we will start to look at our expenditures and look at all the other things that we need to look at. And so it's not just a debt service coverage that drives, you asked specifically to acquiring more debt. The debt service coverage that we have does accommodate some additional debt, but in terms of costs, other costs may go up. And if those costs go up, we do then reevaluate. So it depends on what we do and what the costs are like in May as we start to put this together. The PUC will then have it, and they'll make a decision in September.
I'm sorry, Mr. Cruz, just one more time. So in my notes from our last round, our informational briefing, I had 25 million total and it was 11 million for the debt service, 4 million for a working capital fund, and 10 million for internal capital projects. So now we're saying it looks like it went up about $10 million since the last time we
Yeah.
spoke. So I don't know if there was a discrepancy in the last time we presented, or,
No, I stand corrected on that, Senator.
Okay.
I'm giving you the most current amounts, and I did have to go back to the office and
Okay.
confirm and verify that.
understood. So just for the record, O&M, 13 million, debt service, 11 million, and then internal, an additional 11 million, for a total of 35.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question on some of the details that was shared on the debt service. Greg, you mentioned that the gross borrowing is projecting to be 90 million, but the net proceeds is going to be 70 million, and that the remaining 20 million difference between the two is the cost of funds.
Yeah, there's debt, 1 year value debt service, maximum value debt service is typically required to be set aside on the debt. So that's roughly like $7 or $8 that they pull from the bond proceeds, from the gross proceeds. There's also other reserves that the indenture requires. And of course, there are costs associated with underwriter fees, and so forth and that. So
Are we capitalizing any interest in the borrowing?
on this next borrowing, for the next borrowing we're planning, there's 2 years of cap by interest. So 7 times 2, so that's about $14
Yeah,
million.
and, you know, in previous conversations with the, I don't think it was with the Waterworks Agency, but it was the Power Authority. We did have a lot of discussion about capitalized interest, because you're basically borrowing to pay in advance your interest on your borrowing, but then you're paying interest on that interest. You know, and so I appreciate the questions and the information, Madam Chair, because 2 ideas or 2 things come to mind. One is these reserves that's required for the borrowing. Is there any way for us to reprogram our agency reserves, this 35 million, to be able to account for these reserves that's being required under the indenture, so that we don't need to be borrowing that and paying interest on it? We can instead just be, you know, tagging this account as the reserve account with respect to the debt. That way we're not paying, you know, interest on that reserve to be established. And then secondly, on the capitalized interest, instead of, and I brought this up before, instead of capitalizing interest, why aren't we setting aside whatever we have in these reserves or whatever? You have a debt service reserve of 11 million. Instead of cap-eyeing a year's worth of interest, couldn't we use those reserves to pay those down, so that we're not borrowing for our interest and paying interest on that interest?
Those reserves are required to be kept restricted for the indenture. And this is a great conversation. You know, we had this when we borrowed the $450 million, and you were involved with that. The whole reason we've been doing capitalized interest for all the utilities since we were on the PUC in the late 80s and 90s is the recognition that when we borrow money for an asset, until you actually build it, put it in the ground where it's providing a service for the customer, all right, it's unfair to charge them the full cost of that asset. So what we do is we say, look, there's going to be a construction phase. We borrow the money now. As you know, with GWA procurement, you can't issue a procurement without the money. So you borrow the money. Now you have the money. Now you can build these CapEx projects. And now you can put them out for bid because you have money. And then we've designed for all these years, and even after we left the PUC, the PUC that succeeded us kept the 175% coverage, kept all the requirements of the prior debt. All the prior legislatures passed the same bond agreements. In fact, all the borrowings that we have now are simply amendments to the original borrowing in 2005. You just amend the debenture, right? And the whole idea of the CapEx is to not charge the customer for an asset that they're not able to benefit from until it's constructed. That's number one. Number two, we borrow the money in November. You don't want to start paying principal on a loan you borrow in November, in January. We haven't even put out the bid yet, right? We just got the money. So that's why we follow a model that is common throughout all public financing that I've seen, not just in Guam, but throughout. When I was at Harvard, this is how you structure them. I did the first mortgage revenue bond for Guam in 1980 at GWA. We also had CapEx in there. Because you recognize there's a period of time that if you're going to ask for the customer to pay principal back on that asset, he's not even using it. It's not even built yet. So that's where CapEx emerged. And we actually tried one time to go to 3-year CapEx, and we figured what you were saying too. We said, nah, it's a little pricey. 1's too short, 2 seemed to be the sweet spot. That's where all of your predecessors in the legislature have accepted. That's what the PUC set up. That's what GPA and GWA have used to borrow since the 90s. And it's based on the logic that you shouldn't be like when you build your house, you get a construction loan. You're not paying principal on that construction loan 1 month after you borrow the construction loan. You're just paying interest. And then you build a house, because you're not even living in the house, and you're going to start paying for it. Once the construction loan is finished, you roll that into takeout loan, and then you start paying P&I. So even in traditional lending that we see for average citizens on Guam, whether it's commercial or residential, you don't borrow the money today and 1 month from now you start paying back principal and interest while your contractor starts to build the house. You're paying for a house that you can't even benefit from. So the whole logic of CapEx, capitalized interest, is to recognize that you're not benefiting from the asset till it's built, and you shouldn't have to pay any principal on that asset until it's built. It is a trade-off. You got to pay interest, but think of it this way. If you built your house yourselves, think of when you built your house. It's $100,000, $150,000. You borrow that loan today. Heck, maybe you haven't even drawn down $50,000 in 30 days to pay the contractor for mobilization. But if you don't have CapEx or a construction loan, you're paying principal on your loan 30 days after you borrowed it. You haven't even started construction. So even conventional lending recognizes that there needs to be a lag between the time you pay principal back and the time that you are constructing the asset that is being financed. And that's public finance 101. This is basic. It's a practice you see almost everywhere because it recognizes that ratepayers shouldn't pay for an asset before they can use it. 2 years is enough time to at least be equivalent to give you time to construct that asset, put it into service, and now ask ratepayers to pay principal and interest. And we borrow that CapEx. We do. So but we also invest the CapEx, right? So you have interest costs on the borrowing of the CapEx, but then we stick it in those reserve funds until we draw down, and they're generating interest. So you'll have a little net difference. Usually there's a little net cost, but it's not like it's just sitting there not earning any interest. And let's face it, interest earnings and interest expense the last few years have been pretty low, right? The Fed finally raised it last year. We've been benefiting, all of us have been benefiting, and Senator, you're aware of this. Our original financing was 5.8%. Our last one was 4.2%, right? And that's mainly because we've improved our financial profile. But it's the recognition that the prime hasn't moved at all, but we've been able to lower our interest costs because we build up reserves, because we honor the bond covenants, because we structure debt the way we do. And you've got improved credit ratings, lowered interest rates as a result. And I've never heard anybody on the finance side or the bond side say, why don't you get rid of CapEx? Because they realize that this is pretty standard, because I can't think of any community, unless you're super wealthy, that requires you to repay a loan 30 days after you got it for an asset you haven't even started building yet. And that's why you have CapEx, or capitalized interest.
Yeah, we had the conversation before. I think we still have the same philosophical differences on it. Because no matter what, principal and interest, whether it's a $90 million loan that includes CapEx or a $70 million loan that doesn't include the capitalized interest, you're still talking about paying $90 million in principal and interest, or $70 million in principal and interest. And the question is, are we going to defer that, or are we going to pay for it up front with the resources that we currently have? And this is a conversation that I brought up a while ago, because I've always been of the opinion that as the rate decisions are being made in the agencies, we need to be setting aside for these future planned costs so that we're not having to do capitalized interest. We're instead able to take the resources that we set aside and pay in advance, that we're not going to be putting an additional interest burden on our people for the same project.
Did you build your house with paying your principal back within 30 days?
Well, let me explain let me break down the house logic that you've presented.
I mean,
for
it's the same
example,
logic.
with the construction loan, you take out a construction loan and you pay the interest on that, but then when you refinance that finished project, you're still paying the full principal and interest.
Yeah.
You just paid interest on top of that with the construction
But there's a
loan.
reason you don't pay principal back in 30 days after you get your construction loan. You haven't even started your house. If you want to, you can tell your bank, loan me my construction loan, and I'll pay you principal within 30 days after you loan me the drawdown. You can do that, but you were at Bank of Guam. I mean, I don't know of any bank, or I would say 99% of the residential loans on Guam do not ask the borrower to repay the construction loan 30 days after they've closed the loan.
I think
Because
the point
it's
that
not
I made
realistic.
before, and the point that I'm following up with again, is that if we can avoid paying interest on our interest, I think it's good public policy.
I would agree.
And I think that the reason why financiers and bond advisors would never suggest it is because that's just lower underwriting fees, because you're borrowing less when you're using when
But
you're not
Senator,
using
this has nothing to do with what our underwriters told us. We looked at best practices, and we look at how
But
municipal
I'm
entities.
just mentioning what you brought up in your earlier statement.
Right, but I mean, we're talking about how do municipal entities, publicly owned entities like us, borrow money, and capitalized interest is, at least for construction. Now, I'm with you. If it's just to pay off a loan, pay off tax returns, you don't need capitalized interest. I agree with you there. But when it's for a fixed asset, then, like we had a $30 million line with Bank of Guam, we started paying that right away. We didn't capitalize interest. That was a 10-year note, 5-year balloon. We've rolled it over. We're almost paid it off. But for CapEx, capital expenditures, the agate wastewater, $60 million agate wastewater treatment plant. If we borrow that money 2 years ago, we've issued the bid. It'll be done in February. Under your scenario, we would have started paying that $60 million 2 years ago.
But these are, for example, 50%
We haven't
of
even
the
built the plant.
50% of the borrowing is for reservoir replacement projects.
Mm-hmm.
So these are existing assets.
Not
It's a
necessarily.
replacement of a
No,
reservoir.
we're either going
that's
to replace
no
or
longer-
rebuild.
Right.
That's what the
Right.
court order. You can explain it. We're studying them all now, part of the master plan. We study all 31, and we say number 27 needs to be repaired, number 22 needs to be rebuilt.
Right.
We've rebuilt some, we've repaired some. Miguel can talk you through that. But don't presume that we're just taking the all old 31 tanks and just putting paint on it. This 1/4 of the borrowing, okay, for the CapEx, exclude the interest, the reserves. When we've been authorized to borrow $670 million, we have $70 million more to go. We've already borrowed $600. The net of that is about $520 million of actual CapEx in the ground. Okay, $130 million of the $520 is for tanks. And Miguel can talk to you about the why. It was in the court order. It had to do with making sure we had clean water, because you had contact time in the tanks with the chlorination. One of our first things in the court orders is our horrible chlorination. We had boil water notices. You guys grew up with it. I don't know if you can remember the last boil water notice, but it's been years because we focused under the court order to get to clean water. And in the master plan, it came out that 31 tanks at an estimated cost of $120 million, almost 25% of the 520, had to be either rehabbed, replaced, or repaired.
Right. And so, like, going back to the housing analogy, when you refinance an existing asset, you don't take out a construction loan to do the refurbishments and then refinance the project. You typically would refinance it.
But we're not refinancing any assets.
Right.
And
No, but
these-
and that's why the analogies need to be a little consistent, because we're talking about fixing an existing water system.
The water system is existing. The reservoir replacement and rehabilitation program involves, first, in order for us to inspect an existing reservoir that may be beyond its useful service life, without impacting the system and the customers, we have to construct a new one in order to take it out of service and be able to inspect it and determine whether it's salvageable, in which case we then rehabilitate it, and now we have additional storage capacity, which was also a requirement of the court order. So it isn't just refinancing an existing piece of equipment. There's a little bit more involved to it than that.
And when you say refinance, none of these tanks had debt on it. This is all new debt. In 2005, GWA borrowed money for the first time ever. That's where we got the 5.8 interest rate. We weren't credit worthy. We hadn't had rate increases. We started the rate increases in 04. We got the first borrowing in 05. So these tanks came on the list after 08. We're not refinancing debt. This is all new debt to rebuild a system that was horrible. And we almost lost it to receivership. We were sued on 110 things to do in that court order. We're well on our way to completing it. But it's not like we had old debt that we were refinancing. The first debt was in 05, and it was for the court order. GW had no debt before that. It had never been able to borrow money before that.
But I thought that you said earlier that this was a refunding of the existing debt that we're doing here.
No.
Okay.
No.
So that was not.
No. 2005 was refinanced for a lower interest rate. We went from 5.8 to 4.3 in 2013, 2010, 2014. Yeah. So 9 years later, we did refinance it for 1.5 interest savings on interest on, at that time it was 80 million, 90 million. So that's 1.2 million for the remaining 20 years. It made sense to save 20 million in interest for ratepayers. That number made sense. And it wasn't because, well, so that's why we did that. But, even then, that 2005 money paid for the 2 new outfalls in Agana and Northern, paid to take Agana and Northern to primary treatment. We're still trying to get them to secondary treatment. But all that money went there. None of it went to the tanks. The tanks didn't emerge till after the 2008 master plan. The 2005 borrowing paid for that master plan. It produced for us the menu that resulted in the 2011 renegotiation. Tanks stayed on the same list. Tanks stayed on the list. And we set the timeline to complete all of this by 2021. We then took the package to the legislature, got the permission to borrow $450 million on top of the $220 we had borrowed in 05 and 010. And that's where today we've borrowed 600 of the 670. There's 70 left. We'll borrow that later this year. It'll implement the remainder of the court order on time. No receivership, no arguing with the court, all locally managed where we can have a hearing like this and you can talk to us versus running to the federal court requesting to talk to the receiver. And that's the part I'm most proud of, that the people of Guam saved their water system, can run their own water system. There was an anecdote when we went EPA. One of the regulators said, "Yeah, we were surprised you were going to finish agate secondary treatment." I mean, they didn't think we were going to be able to do it. Of course, we can do it. We're good people. We're capable people. We borrow money wisely. I look at the capitalized interest as a cost of doing business, no different than a construction loan before your takeout loan. Yeah, you're generating interest as you draw down. You can either pay it or not pay it, or they roll it all into the takeout loan.
The thing is, in a construction loan, you're paying the interest as it's being built. You're paying it out of pocket. You're not taking out a bigger construction loan to pay your interest as you're building.
Well, it depends on how you structure your loan. Some people are
No, that's almost every single home construction loan. I go to the bank, I borrow $150,000 to build my house. They start building it, and I'm paying the interest out of my own pocket. I don't borrow $165 to pay the interest for the 6 months. And that's why I'm saying, why are we doing that with these projects when we should be setting aside the money to be paying for that interest while it's being built and then financing it? So again, it's just a philosophical issue. Madam Chair, I don't want to take up the whole hearing. I just wanted to raise the issue because I really think that the practice of capitalized interest is basically causing us to pay interest on top of our interest. And I think that if we do, if we plan our projects and our rate adjustments in a way where we're able to set aside those kind of reserves, and we have good reserves, and I'm proud of the healthy reserve. That's a very good job. But if we're able to do that in order to be able to avoid having to pay interest on top of interest, I think that would be a better practice. So I just wanted to have the conversation, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Well, thank you for that. Mr. Bordalio, you said that you were court ordered to replace tanks to increase storage capacity?
The program includes, the court order requirement includes evaluating the existing tanks to make sure that they're safe, or if they need to be rehabilitated or replaced, and then also to enhance the amount of storage. I think we previously were may have been around between 16 and 18 million gallons of storage, and I think now we're up to 30.3. So we are providing additional storage that is more commensurate with the fluctuations in demand that occur in our current system. I think what we had before may have been, we were underserved. The system was being underserved by the amount of storage that we had, and so part of the court order requirement was to alleviate that situation.
So all of the tanks that we have now, or majority of them, they are basically filled to capacity.
They are
At
they
least
won't-
60%
the levels
and over.
the levels in the tank vary every day according to the demands of the day, and the demands. You have peak periods of demand, low
Yeah,
periods,
yes, I
right?
know.
So they fluctuate. But when there are the way we are operating the system now, at levels of lowest demand, we're filling those reservoirs back up so that when everybody wakes up in the morning, we're able to absorb those changes in storage levels and accommodate all of the demand. So we try to maintain our reservoirs at a sufficient level to accommodate the cycle of emptying and filling during the changes during the day.
So there's no tanks on Guam that are like 10 feet high and 40-foot and 10
No, we
feet of
stopped that
water?
practice. There was that practice before I came on board, and we no longer operate the system that way. There is one tank in the south, which is, I don't know if it was oversized when it was put in, and we keep that one at a low level to accommodate the area that it serves. If we were to fill it to capacity, the water in the tank would go stale, and then we would put the consumer's health at risk. So we manage that one and keep it artificially low, but it's sufficient enough to accommodate the cycles in demand because the population served is fairly small.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this is for question number 2. In the Loomis report, there is a joint stipulation under number 11, adopting the rate structure changes. There are a number of recommendations. One of them is to adopt a rate that would encourage conservation. The assessment of this opportunity should have been completed by December 30, 2016 for implementation of recommended changes by FY 2017. Has this rate structure study been performed? So if you have okay.
Senator, the study is underway, but it hasn't been completed as of today.
So we're behind schedule.
Yes, we are.
Do you know when we'll be completing that?
There is already a recommendation, a draft report that was put forth by the consultants, but that hasn't gone beyond that form. It's still in draft.
So when will it not be a draft, and when will it actually be implemented?
It would still have to be vetted with the CCU for them to adopt the report. My best guess really is maybe in the next couple of months I should be able to take it to the CCU.
Okay.
And of course, yeah, the
Thank
PUC.
you.
Yeah.
I read that lifeline rates are not increased unless the rate increases are 20% or more.
No, the cost increase. Unless GWA can prove the costs have increased 20%, then we can petition to increase the lifeline. So I think in 2013 was the first time we got an adjustment in lifeline, and we hadn't had one since 08 or 09, something like that. So yeah, the PUC order, I think it's our order, says that until a utility can prove that their costs have gone up 20%, then you can't. Then you keep the lifeline rate. Once you get above 20%, you can petition for that. So we got an adjustment in 13, and we hadn't had one since 7 or 8.
Okay.
Primarily because of debt service on the loans. That's where the costs come from.
What is your basic lifeline level of water service, and what is the average monthly customer payment?
That wasn't something we gave them last. We gave you this last.
Yes, Mr. Verdalio.
Here, this one. Do you have this one from your last
Yes, I do.
presentation?
Thank you.
If I can just respond to that, if you're a consumer, residential customer using less than 5,000 gallons a month,
Yes.
that's roughly about $60 a month. If you're a consumer using more than 5,000, we're looking at about $80, $70 to $80. That's what I recollect.
Yeah, 62,
And what is-
$280 and $88.
And
you know that almost half our customers, residential customers, use less than 5,000 gallons. Yeah.
And what is your average residential consumer consumption level?
I think we're between the average consumption is around 6,000 or so.
It's about 7,500 gallons a month.
Can you say that again, Mr. Cruz? For the
Sorry.
Thank you.
7,500 gallons a month is about the average monthly consumption by a typical residential customer.
And can you just explain to me how it differs from regular residential rate and the percentage of all residential customers on lifeline rates?
I'm not sure I understand the
Okay.
question.
So of our 40,000 residential customers, almost half are on the benefit from the lifeline rate. And the lifeline rate is about 25% of the regular rate. So let me say it different. Actually, we all benefit from the first 5,000 gallons.
I was going to say that.
Yeah, all of us benefit. We get a discount on the first 5,000 gallons, right? What's nice is almost half our customers don't use more than 5,000. So even though the average is 7,500, the half above the 5,000 use a lot more than the half below the 5,000, but half of our customers, half of our 40,000 residential customers don't pay more than, don't use more and pay higher than the lifeline. They use less than 5,000 gallons.
Yeah,
Okay,
and I'd just like to add that this is something we set with the PUC a long time ago, and we were struggling to find out how do you help those who are economically disadvantaged. And we tried to come up with different schemes, and traditionally, the way it's done in most communities is that those who are on public assistance and qualify for public assistance usually then apply to a city government, state government for assistance to pay their utility bills. The utilities themselves don't have this thing. They just charge a rate. And if you're in Honolulu, you apply for the city and county of Honolulu, and they help you, they assist you in paying your utility bill. On Guam, this does exist with the federal government at public health. The problem is that public health chooses, it gets some money from the federal government, but it's not sufficient to do all of what you're allowed to do with the money. So public health chooses to use the money for something else. They never use the money for utility subsidy payments. And that's the problem. In other words, the way it worked is, think of it this way. If you, your one group of customers are being subsidized by another group of customers. But in reality, what it is everybody who gets their water bill, they get benefit from that lower rate for the first 5,000. And then as they go over that 5,000, they have to pay a higher rate. Now, I would say to you that some of the people who are economically disadvantaged or, on public assistance, they may have more need for more water. And
7 kids, 8
7
kids,
kids,
9
whatever,
That's what we
or they
noticed.
have health conditions that require them to do more laundry or whatever, whatever their needs are. And so therefore, they get break to the first 5,000, but after that, they have to pay more. If you want to use tax dollars to help subsidize these people, I'm all for it. I think that's a great idea. But, we're struggling to try to give some break to those. So if those people who are on public assistance, who are economically disadvantaged, if they keep their consumption below 5,000, then they benefit from a lower rate. But, again, it's not a really good measurement or a good way of doing it. It's like a broad paintbrush. We came up with the best deal we thought we could do. And it's the same thing on the power. The first break is the first 500 kW is at a different rate.
Whether you're wealthy or poor,
Whether
your
you're
first
wealthy or
500
poor.
kW is discounted.
And again, I would suggest to you that a lot of people who are economically disadvantaged and on public assistance probably have health conditions where they need air conditioning, and they probably consume more than the first 500. But that was what we came up. I'm very serious. We were at the PUC in 1985, and we struggled to try and find out how we could help these people. And all we could think of was this broad stroke that says, let's give everybody a break. And it works if that's all they consume. But it doesn't really address their needs. And again, I would say if you went to public health, you would find out that they have a program. The problem is the money to fund the program is tied in with a whole bunch of other programs. And public health says there's not enough money to do all of these things, so we just don't do the utility assistance at all. They don't do it at all. They just don't do 1 penny. And they take the money for other needs. That's a policy call they make,
I mean, there is one community that, and Joey's right, back in the 80s, that was the way to do it. Now, Portland has come up with a cool methodology, and we just haven't thought about implementing it with the PUC. Portland says if you're on public assistance, and you get a card, then you qualify for Lifeline. If you ain't on public assistance, you don't get Lifeline. That way you're really assisting only those with dearly in need. The Duenases, the Sanchez's, and the Berdalios don't really need a discount, and the Cruzes don't need a discount on the first 500 anything. But we know Tan Marias, we know citizens that could really use it. So Oregon went to a model that I thought was pretty good, and it's something we should look at. And what's good is we don't have to vet anything, and we don't ask the government for money. But here's what happens is that half the group that's under the lifeline in water, that number's going to get smaller. And therefore, if you're not on public assistance, guess what? Your water bill's going up. Now, that's the challenge. Here you are, we're all worried about keeping that water bill more affordable. But right now, if you were to change the lifeline rate to only the truly needy, then a whole bunch of people would have to have their water bill or their power bill increased. So for now, we've kept it simple, first 500, first 5,000. There's a lot of good arguments as to whether you should refine it. The presumption back in the 80s was poorer people use less energy and water. That's not necessarily realistic.
I think, Madam Chair, I'd like to perhaps not change it based on public assistance, but it's obvious that there may be some takers to make it a voluntary, get out of the lifeline rate voluntarily, because I think Mr. Sanchez just volunteered for individuals to get off the lifeline rate, so maybe a voluntary exclusion.
You can ask for volunteers, but I think, how many of you want to volunteer to rate? I mean, would you volunteer to raise your power and water bill?
We got 4, though, on the table.
Well, you got 7 if you join us, but how many would volunteer to do it? I mean, be realistic. Right.
So you mentioned that in 2013, the lifeline rates did increase, right?
Mm-hmm.
By how much again?
Actually, it was 2000. We just had one increase in 2017. There was a 3.5% increase. 6.10%.
Oh, 3.5%
Oh, there
in
was.
2017.
Yeah.
6.5. That's what I was thinking.
6.1%.
6.1% in 2013 was the increase. It's in that table we gave you with the water
Thank
bill,
you.
water and residential bills.
Okay. And so, because you did the 3.5%, are you planning another adjusted lifeline rate this year?
Go ahead.
Commissioner Saul.
You know, again, Senator, that's where we have to go back to the numbers. Because again, as Commissioner Sanchez said, and I think all of us have said, it depends on the increase in your cost, right? So we have to go back and look. So I can't give you an answer at this time. We have to wait until we go through the cost. And
Well,
see what
you mentioned that you're going to borrow the bond towards the latter part of the year. So if you're not going to borrow any more money, there should not be an increase this year.
Well, but
no,
your power
because
bill's
you have
going
other
up.
costs.
Yeah,
You have other
are going
costs.
up. It's
Darren.
not just borrowing.
It's not just borrowing. You know, one of the things that you have to understand is when we took all the plants, the 2 big plants, Northern and Agania, to advanced primary treatment, which is what we agreed to with the federal government, when we started doing it and actually meeting the permit requirements, we had a huge increase in chemical costs. So there are other costs
So
that go up.
wastewater.
That's wastewater.
Okay.
But when, you know, our costs are our costs. But even in water, you have chlorine costs. You have all these other things that we have to do. So we don't say today our rates are going up, our rates are going down. What we do is we do the math. Starting in May, we try to put together our projections. This is what our actual costs are based on what it was many, many years ago. And this is where we're going. And I'll give you a good example. The reason why we were able to do a 3.5% increase last year as opposed to the projected 7% was because one of our costs really went down, the cost for power. Because the cost for power in 2014 was running at $1.7 million a month. Then because of the drop in the price of oil, it went down to about 900, just under $1 million, right, Greg? And under $1 million, so that was a savings of about $8 million, $9 million a year. So that $9 million, $8 million savings was able to be used to,
Yeah,
well,
one of the
yeah,
reasons we were
it
able
dropped
to
the
reduce-
rate from 7 down to 3.5. This is the current year rate increase. So as we go forward, we will look again at what our costs are. Now, bear in mind, this is the reason is towards the end of this month and the beginning of March, so into March, we will actually start to operate the Agate Santa Rita wastewater treatment plant. So those costs were not in our costs last year. Chemical costs, all those other things, those are in our costs. That's just an example I wanted to give you. So those are things that we need to look at. We also are upgrading and doing other things with the water wells. So on the water side, they're doing other things. You're replacing motors. You're doing a lot of other things. We're upgrading electrical systems so they don't burn out motors. So there's a lot of costs. So until we actually look at our costs and say, okay, this is what our costs, these are our revenues, What do we need to continue our movement forward and to pay our costs? Then we come up with a number. So the 4% could be 4%, could be 3%, could be 2%, could be 1%, could be 0%. After we do the exercise of now reviewing our costs.
Okay. I have a question about
Sure.
the reviewing of the cost. So can you give us maybe a timeline for when you might be able to give us a number?
Well,
Either-
this is the way it works. We have to give the consultants PUC, or the PUC rather, by June 1st. So by the May meeting of the CCU, Mr. Cruz and Mr. Bordallo will have massaged their thoughts to the point where they are now saying, you know what, we believe that what we need is a rate increase of 2%, and this is the reason why. Okay? And we put that together and we give it to the, we first, the CCU has to look at it and say, we agree, we disagree.
In
Or
June.
in May.
In May,
the May
okay.
meeting. And then in June 1st, we have to transmit that to the PUC. So it's at the June meeting, it's at the May meeting, I'm sorry, the May meeting of the CCU. Okay, so the May meeting of the CCU, that's when we get to review that, and we get to say, okay, this is what we believe we need. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4.
But I think it's
Okay,
I
so
think-
then, once we do that, we give that to the PUC on June 1st. They take June, July, August, and in their September discussions, that's when they coalesce around what they believe we need. They have an advantage because as you go through July, August, and September, you get to have more data. So, so that's the whole rationale behind the way we've set this up.
And Senator, was your question related to Lifeline increases or any increase?
Any increase?
Oh, okay. Because Lifeline probably won't change. We just changed it last year. It takes a while to grow your costs, 20%. So, but this 4%. Right. But I'm just saying that's not going to change this year because our costs aren't going to go up 20% in 1 year. The projected, the 5-year rate plan said 4% is the projected one. I know we've challenged our team to see if we can avoid it, just the way we were able to cut the other one in half. These two don't like to hear it, but that's what we're pushing them to see if they can.
Yeah,
because we are
and-
strong. We are strong financially. So
Yeah, and
can
one
we
of
do?
the things I want to stress is we do try to control costs. That is a big thing with us. But where we will be upfront with you, where we need to spend money, we will spend money. We need to do more in our system. One of the other things, is again, we are open and transparent. We bring this out at our meetings. We fully discuss it. We let people know. And then the PUC gets its hands on it. And they conduct their own research and study. And then they go through their meeting and let people know. We go there and then they make a decision.
So thank you, Mr. Duenas. So this question kind of diverts into a different topic, but I wanted to ask, and I know that there's some ratepayers in the audience, but I wanted to ask if you could just walk me through a little bit of your customer service protocol. So let's say Tanana calls up and says, my bill has doubled over the past 2 months. I'm realizing that it's doubled, and she's freaking out a little bit. She doesn't believe that her usage has changed. So how does GWA address this, and are there resources there to accommodate these inquiries? Do you have enough resources?
Currently, we have enough resources. We need a little more resources in customer service, but not necessarily to address those types of issues. We have other issues in customer service that we probably need more staff for. But with regard to your specific question, if a customer were to call up or come in with a concern about the cost or their billing doubling, then customer service would take a look at their usage and compare their previous month's usage to see if it's a large increase in consumption on total gallons billed. Then we can go back, and customer service will frequently send the meter reader out to pull the data logs from the meters, and then we can see hour by hour what the consumption is. And if we see consistent consumption even during the midnight hours, and it's indicative of a leak, and then advise the customer of that. If there's a question, we don't see that type of pattern, there's a question about the reliability of the meter, then customer service will direct their team to pull the meter, in which case it goes to our meter test facility and we verify its accuracy.
And I'd like to add to that because I want to give you my personal experience. No, it's a good one.
He was one of those customers.
No. Yes, I went on a trip,
Joey.
and then when I left, I came back, and my next water bill was $800 and some. And I freaked out, and I went, and this usually it's $60 to $80, $90. That's my water bill. And so I freaked out, and I said, wow. So I said to the guys, and exactly what Miguel outlined for you. They went, they pulled their data logs, they came back to me, and I left I think on the 27th of July. On the 28th, 29th, and 30th, the water was flowing like nobody's business, which leads me to believe, because there's no leak. What happened was you could see exactly when the water spiked, the usage spiked.
Daylight hours.
For a few days, no. I was gone off island. Nobody was home. My only conclusion is that there was some water theft. I came back and my neighbor's house, beautifully water blasted all around. But I wasn't there. I don't have cameras. But so what was I to do? The customer service people looked at me and said, Mr. Duenas, but you consumed the water. Oh, maybe I didn't, but it went through your meter. I ended up paying an $800 water bill. Nobody's going to cry over Joey Duenas having to pay an $800 water bill. Okay, I get it. But I just want to show you that this does happen. Okay? It also happens on the electric side, where people leave off island, and all of a sudden people run their extension cords over to the other house and start running all their stuff. This does happen. So you have theft issues from your neighbors. But the good thing is now, with our meters, we can pull the log out, and you can actually show me and say, Mr. Duenas, it went up here, here, and here. I said, well, I left here the next day. Hey, he's gone. Let's go have a party.
And it works the other way too. So when you pull these, the coolest things about the meters is you can pull out data logs, and they don't lie. I mean, I know we've heard of 100 customers say, "There's no way this is my water bill," but sure enough, if you see that leak at 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, 100 gallons, something's going on, right? And it works the other way, where if your meter under registers, right, and all of a sudden instead of an $80 bill, you get a zero bill, a $10 bill, a $5 bill, right? It can work that way too, but no one calls us when their $80 bill is a $10 bill. They take advantage of the leak or of the bad meter until we find it. But every month these two guys get spit out a report about low and no reading meters. And they go out and verify, is it low and no read because someone's off island? Is it low and no read because the meter's busted, right? How much is our meter test bench? $1 million, $1.5 million, court ordered. But it was ordered because it says you guys need a way to test your meters. So we now have a world-class meter test bench up in Upper Tuma that we never had in 2003. We have that now. That's the meter test bench we take it to. We slap in a interim meter. We didn't have this 15 years ago where we could even give you a backup meter so we could fix the other one. But we've invested in a meter test bench facility. Those aren't cheap, but we now are equipped to better address Tunjoey or Tanana's concern, and at least to the greatest degree possible, we can say this is what our data shows, and the meters are performing well. The data logs work. The protocol is we accept you at face value. We first go check your meter. We share that information with you. Sometimes it answers the question right away. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's something we have to do because maybe the meter has stopped working. But generally, the protocol begins with that meter read. And we're able to provide information to customers now that we weren't able to do before.
Okay, and Mr. Berdalia, you were alluding to other issues with customer service. Did you want to expound on that? You said that that's not necessarily an issue, but you have other issues.
No, Senator, I don't care to elaborate on it. It's just we're trying to improve our service across all fronts, not just the calls about the leaking meters.
Okay.
That's all I meant.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So, Mr. Berdalia, our last meeting we discussed non-revenue water, which is basically the new term for unaccounted for water. And they threw a dollar figure out there of 53%.
Not a dollar, percent of water. Of
Hold on, let me
non-revenue
finish
water.
what I'm saying, Mr. Sanchez. Thank you very much. There was a dollar figure there's a dollar figure amount for the 53% of non-revenue water. And it was thrown in the ballpark around $5.5 million. Is that correct?
That's correct. The 5.5, the question that I believe that you asked at the very first hearing was, what is the cost, or after the very first hearing, and one of the follow-up questions was, what is the cost to to the system of the water that is lost? So we did an analysis that incorporated the use of power and chemicals as the primary cost. The labor costs are the same whether we lose or don't lose that water. And so based on that cost differential is around 5.3 million, I thought. Was the number.
5.3 million, okay. So how much did it cost for the 47% water that was accounted for?
This would be slightly higher than a number in terms of the power and the chemicals, but you factor in all the other parts of the operation that include all of the labor, then the cost is different. So our water expenses versus our wastewater expenses, I think, are it's roughly a maybe
This is
70-30 split in terms of our overall expenses.
But not wastewater. This is specifically for potable water, for water itself.
Right. So if you take our overall operating expenses, the
Okay.
cost attributable to the water side is close to 60 to 70% of that number.
And what is the number?
I'm sorry, Senator, I don't have it at the top of my
60 to
head.
70 million. We're about 120 million a year, right?
Just the expense side, though.
Does that include debt, right?
We're looking at 60 to 70 million a year on the expense side, so 60% of 60 million.
So $60 million for the 47% of revenue water?
60% of that.
60%.
So you're not counting the debt on this when you
No,
do this?
not yet.
Okay.
So what's the $1 million figure? I'm sorry, I'm lost.
So 60% of 60 million would be 36 million.
Okay, so
is the
36 million
cost of operating the
for the
water system.
47%.
That's the cost of operating
The overall, the
the water
100%.
system.
The
So if
water
you
system.
subtract that 5.3 from that, the balance is what it costs us to produce everything else.
The water
Okay.
that we do bill for. That's the number you're looking for. That's the number he's giving
Yeah.
you.
So in a perfect
Okay.
world, our 47 should go down to 42 if you had zero water loss, based on having 5.3 million in expenses, additional expenses, because you have 53% water
Okay.
loss. So that's what we
Okay.
were talking about the last hearing. If we could cut it in half, we'd cut that to 2.6 million out of the 47 million.
Sure.
Okay, I have a question. So the total cost of operating our water system is 36 million. 53% of that we suffer from a 53% water loss at a cost of 5.3 million. So for 47% of water use, we have a cost of 30.7 million.
But remember, the water that is used is treated, pumped, plumbed,
Thank you, Mr.
labored.
Sanchez. Mr. Cruz, could you answer that question?
But you're comparing apples and oranges.
The specific question that you asked after the first hearing had to do with the cost of the water lost.
Mhm.
So the total, based on that percentage, we took the amount of power and chemicals that go into extracting the water and putting it into the distribution system. We took that cost, and then we calculated the 53% of that, and that gives us the $5.3 million number that was provided to you.
So this water loss, that water is not chemically treated.
It is.
Wasn't.
No, it is.
Okay,
It is.
That's the
so
5 million we're talking about.
right.
And
So
the power.
so
And the power.
okay, and the
Put it up.
power. So how is the water that we use $30 million more expensive than the water that we lose?
Yeah, can you try breaking it down for us?
Sure.
If,
Oh, go ahead.
go ahead.
I know there's an
Okay,
explanation,
so,
just
so
to
we
help us
pump
to
up, we pump
understand.
up this water, and it costs us, what'd you get, 30, what'd you get, 40, 60% of 60? So we're using 36 million, right? Okay. So we pump up this water, and it costs us $36 million to pump up this water and deliver this water to all of you, okay? Now, unfortunately, because of the water loss, there's $5 million that if we were able to eliminate water loss completely, we could eliminate $5 million. All right? Well,
But-
no, you can't eliminate the cost of providing water to citizens, all right? I mean, we still got to provide you water. So all we're saying is we pump up this amount of water, we lose half of it, right? And the cost of losing half of that is $5 million. But the other $31 million is used to pump up the remaining water that does get pumped up, gets treated, gets sent to your house. It doesn't leak back. You use it.
But he said
The
it
water
already
loss,
gets treated.
the water loss
All water
rates,
gets treated.
Yeah.
But some leaks back into
the amount
ground.
that,
Yes.
the
That's
number
what we
that we
lose
gave
with
you
that.
for the water loss is only for the power and the chemicals.
That's all that's
Because
lost.
even if we cut that number down, the labor costs associated with it, the equipment, the gas for all the vehicles that
Doesn't go
go down,
away.
and that still stays the same. So your specific question was, what was the cost of the water loss? And that's what we gave you. But the rest, it's not going to be a straight percentage across all of our expenses, because when
I
that
see.
leaks into the ground, it doesn't take all the labor and the fuel
To get
and
it
the
back.
equipment expenses with it.
Okay, so that's why 47% of the revenue water is more, because you account for the operations
Yes.
and the
what
personnel.
we're able to sell to people.
Okay,
Right. That's what we're able to sell to people, is that remaining 47%.
okay. Please don't get upset with me. But do you have the breakdown of
Senator,
the 47?
I
Could
tend
we
to
give
use
that to
most
you?
of my brain power for analysis, so I don't memorize a lot of
So
numbers. I
what,
can
we
provide
provide
Yes,
it to you
that's
at a
what I'm
later date?
asking.
Sure,
That's
we'll
what I'm asking.
we'll try and provide that to you at a
Yes,
later
that's
date.
what I'm asking. I don't expect you to do it now, Mr. Berdalio.
Madam Chair, if I could just
Yes.
add on to that request, a side-by-side breakdown of the cost that goes into the water used and the cost of the water lost. Because we have 5.3 million for 53%, and then 30.7 million for 47%. So if we could just have it like almost side by side, water lost and what the costs were, water used and what the costs were, so we can really see. And I'm just and really, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around it, because if we're losing these waters in leaks, that means that they're already in the system.
Keep in mind that not all of the water that is in that percentage is leaks. There's, there's flushing, there's firefighting that doesn't get metered, right? All of that works its way into the equation. There's theft, which is also in that equation. And so
Could we also then ask for get a breakdown then of on the water loss, how much is to leakage at least, so I can wrap my head around a firm number
well,
there?
I'd like to wrap my head around it too, but we don't have at this time. We're giving you the best numbers that we have. I don't have any. I'm not withholding anything from you. If I have more detail, I would give it to you. But we are. When I get these numbers, I'm challenging my people. Are you confident in the production number? In order for us to come up with the percentage. So I'm challenging all of those numbers. So if you give me a little time, our numbers will improve as we refine the process. And as soon as I have more detail, I'll certainly provide it.
And
I
I'd like to add,
I just want to explain. The only reason I'm asking, or I'm trying to ask for it, is because my interpretation is water loss is leak, but you throw in all the other variables that are difficult to measure. But I'm trying to get a handle on, because a lot of the conversation centering around how much we're losing to leakages. So I know that there's flushing from the fire department or whatever, but are we talking about that being 10% of the water loss, or what have you? I'm trying to get an understanding here.
I think, Senator, two things. First off, I'd like to remind Miguel that what we do in the water industry is we go to certain what do you call that, the metrics, the
M26.
AWWA free
M26. Go ahead.
M30. Yeah.
M26, and you see when we say water is non-revenue, it doesn't just mean it's leaks. It could be theft. It could be a number of things. And so what we are doing, I want to make sure you understand this, we are addressing this problem. We started addressing this back in 2011 when we adopted M26.
I think even further than that, but that's the most recent.
That's the
data
most
that-
recent data that we have is
I understand.
2011.
In the first roundtable we had, the industry standard, or the standard loss across the industry was 10%,
well,
and ours is at
it's-
57%.
I won't say that that's an average. I would say that that's probably what most utilities find acceptable, but there are many utilities that aren't at that number, right? So the best way to get a handle on that is to use benchmark surveys, which takes a sample of all the utility populations and they provide their data, and then based on that, AWWA on an annual basis puts out what are the averages, what's the median, and so on and so forth. So we can provide the most recent copy of that when we get it, and then it should give you an idea of what the average is across the industry based on that sampling and that analysis. But I think 10 to 20% is like the benchmark of what they find acceptable, what they shoot for. We are definitely not there, and we recognize that, and we're doing everything we can to bring that number down.
And because this disparity between 5 million for 53% and 30 million for 47% is just really difficult for me to reconcile. So if you guys, in your report to Madam Chair, if you can show where the cost jumps in terms of how much the water we use costs versus the water loss, and why it's so much less expensive, because I would rather be a customer who lives off of leaks, the cost of providing the service that you're leaking away, than the cost that you're providing for the water use. And so I really would like to see where the
Senator,
disparity
I think
is.
let me see if I can explain it better. It costs us for the sake of discussion, it costs us $36 million to run the water system right now, to pump up enough water every day, distribute it, chlorinate it, get it to you, right? If we had zero water loss, then that $36 million would go down by $5 million. That's it. That's as simple as that. You're trying to compare.
Half of the water that you're producing is more than half is being lost.
But if you
But
take
the
that
cost of that
if you
loss
take
is
that
only-
number, Senator, the 36 million, and you divide it by the total number of gallons produced, I think that's what you're looking for in order to make that balance in terms of proportion. The 5 million for 53% of the water and 30-some million for 47% of the water. There is a baseline cost which has nothing to do with whether the water leaks or not,
Right.
or whether it's sold or not, and that baseline cost comprises the bulk of the 36 million overall. So the incremental cost is, if you take that 53 or 5.3 million and divide it by the 53%, then that'll give you the 100% for power and chemicals for all of the water that's produced, and that is the portion that's attributable. That's the variable cost on just those two items. But then the baseline cost of all the people that are employed and all the equipment that is used to run the operations, repair the leaks, that, and half of the administrative staff to run the operations, that kind of thing. That all figures into that baseline cost. So the incremental is only that 5.3 for the amount that leaks out of, that we can't account for. Right?
Water loss affects us at the margin. It doesn't eliminate all our costs. If you got rid of all leaks, you'd only save $5 million of the 36. You still got to pay the other 31 to people to pump it up, clean it, pay to deliver water to you. Those costs don't go away. So I think you're confusing the fact that, in a perfect world, we'd love to pump up all the water and pump up only the water we need and sell all the water that we pump up. But every water company in the world has some leakage. Every company. But it should be 10 to 15, 20. We're at 50. We all agree. We want to get that number down. But if you just did the simple math, if 50% is 5.3 and we cut water loss to 25%, then you'd save $2.7 million. But you're not going to save $31 million by getting 50% down to 10%. Because the other water that is going to people's house, you need to spend $31 million
for infrastructure,
for people
labor.
for the labor, the pumps, the power.
But correct me if I'm wrong. I may be completely out to lunch here, but you have to pump 100% of what you're doing now in order to get that 47% to the consumer.
We have to pump up enough water to meet the community's needs.
Right. So
35 million gallons a day,
100%
right?
of the
Is that what it is?
$36 million cost to operate the system.
Wait, hold on, what's our MGD?
In order for us to get the 47%
Let
to
me help you with where
the
you're going.
consumer.
30,
We pump up-
36 MGD plus 2 down at Ugam.
But
Maybe
for the
it's
water,
let's just say
we have
40 for
okay.
the
So
sake of
every
this.
day, the people of Guam need 40 million gallons a day.
Right.
And it costs us $36 million a year to provide them 40 million gallons a day. Okay? And in that 36 million is $5 million of losing 53% of your water. The cost of the power and the chemicals to pump up.
The people of Guam consume 40 million gallons.
No, that's what's produced.
That's what's produced,
That's what
right?
we know
Okay,
that.
so of that
That's
40
comes out
million
of the
gallons,
wells.
it's costing the $36 million to produce that. Of that 40 million gallons, they're only actually receiving 47% of that.
True, but
Yes.
but it only costs $5 million for the part we're losing. So if we it only costs us $5 million. Yeah, right. Because So
I think it looks good on paper, but it just doesn't make
no,
any
it's
sense.
simple
to me.
math. Senator, simple
Senator.
math. It costs us $36 million a year.
They're not
to-
charging
to-
for the operation and the labor and
on
that-
leakage.
on that
It just
leakage.
leaks. I mean, then we
But,
pump
Well,
it
but,
and
but
it's
it
not
does
just
have a
leak.
cost.
It
It
does.
does.
Yes,
have a
yes,
cost.
it does.
recognize
It
that.
costs
It's the
almost as
electric.
much.
No, it's the
No, it
electric
does. It only
cost
costs $5 million,
and
Senator.
chemicals. So when you zero that out and say it's the electric cost, the electricity cost to pump. If you got rid of all the non-revenue water and you had zero non-revenue water in a perfect world, you would then be able to save some electric cost and some
chemical
chemical
cost.
cost. And that
Up to
number
$5
would be
million.
$5.3 million. That's what that number would be.
It's simple as that.
Everything
But
else
you'd-
would still be
but
there.
if you'd save that water, the cost would
Oh,
still
no, we
go
still
up
wanna
because
do
of
it.
the
You would
operations
save
and
you
the
know-
no.
labor.
You would save $5 million if we had no
5
leaks. We would save $5 million in avoided electricity to repump up the leak and to
And
re-chemical
chemicals.
the water loss.
And,
That's
and
all
it's
you
not
lose.
leaks.
That's all you
Again, I have
lose.
to stress, there is
Yes, a
theft,
breakdown, yes.
non-functioning meters, it's leaks in lines, it's leaks in tanks, it's flushing
So
water. system.
$31 million for the 47%.
Is what it costs to
That's
get
what it costs, yeah.
31 million is what it costs to get 40 million gallons a day to the people of Guam. Now we have to pump up more water to net 40 million gallons that we actually build. The 40 million is no, that's actual gross pumping.
No,
so we pump up 40 and we only sell 20 to keep the math simple. Right? It costs us $36 million a year to sell 20 million gallons.
Okay.
That 20 million gallons. If we didn't lose that other 20 million gallons, we would save $5 million of power and
And-
chemical costs that we lose when the water leaks into the ground
And
because we
we're
had the
working
power to
on
pump
that
it up.
20 million.
What's that?
We're working on the 20 million. It's not going to be 20 million,
20 million.
once we, the 20 million
Oh, yeah,
gallons
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah,
we're
yeah.
losing.
Absolutely.
Because
And-
we're
and
doing
yet-
line
and yet-
replacements, we're doing all these
That's
other
our goal.
things.
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yeah, no,
And
that's
yet
our goal.
GWA still made a net of 28.5 million.
What do you
Well,
saying?
no.
What do you mean
2016.
that?
Before debt. So you're not. you got-
No, this is this
It's
before
pre-debt.
debt?
It's pre-debt.
Yeah.
Before interest and debt service. That's one of the things that was a little misleading in the fake news article that came out from the OPA.
No, it's not fake
It said
This is-
GWA makes $29 million. That's operating income before interest and principal.
So you're saying the OPA report is wrong?
No, the OPA was right.
Okay.
The characterization by the media and perhaps
No,
by her.
I'm reading this from the OPA
Yeah,
report.
even her, she's correct. Our operating
Okay,
income
so
was
she's
29 million, but she didn't. That was before she factored in interest and principal. And when you take that out, you make $5 million. And why are we trying to make money? Because we know there's more borrowings coming. We're creating the cash flow to service that debt service when the Cap I rolls off, and that's why. How do you borrow $650 million? You raise rates between over 15, 16 years. You spread them out. You do them in increments. Maybe you have to do a little Cap I. That's a good philosophic discussion, but that's how we structured it. But that's how you borrow $650 million. You got to spread those rate increases over time, as long as
And
the community
once
can
you're
handle it.
in a steady state of operation, what you do manage to make after you pay off all the debt service and put that in reserve, that then funds try to fund internally because you're always going to have capital improvement needs, you're always going to have capital maintenance needs. And if you fund it from that without having to go out and borrow, then that's really the best case, and that's what we're striving towards, but we're not there yet.
Well, and the reason why I'm really trying to wrap my head around this water loss question, the debt question, and now the operating revenue question is because we're running a water system that's producing 40 million gallons, right? but the need of the community is actually 47% of that. But we're still incurring the capital costs to run a $40 million water system.
Just O&M, just power and chemicals. You're not, your tanks don't go away.
And so
your
when
pumps don't go away.
when we're operating, when we're borrowing, because we have to produce 100% in order to provide the 47%, right? And so our entire system is built to provide $40 million worth of water in order to get $20 million to the actual customer, which means that these bonds and these capital improvement projects that eat away at that $29 million operating income is all being done to maintain a system that's producing 100%, maintaining a system that's producing 200% more than what we are actually using.
Maintain and rebuild.
Maintain and rebuild, yes.
You gotta remember, the 45% of the borrowing is for wastewater facilities. When you add up that 520 million and you do the math, you're going to find out that it's 55. If you split the part that is, what do we call? We have water, we have wastewater, and we have other. If you split that evenly, it's basically a 55-45 split on the 520 million water, wastewater. So 45% of the borrowing is going to wastewater, which has nothing to do with water loss or debt service. So I appreciate, like you do, we're trying to beat that $5 million up. But we're a $130 million company. A year company. So we recognize that whether we get to 5 million to 2 million or to zero, we're not going to be able to go to Tanana and say, gee, now we're going to roll back your rates 100% because we save $5 million. We need to gross $130 million to produce all the water the people of Guam need, to take the water away from them and process it properly in wastewater, to have reserves and pay the debt service on these borrowings. And one of the things, and I appreciate where Senator San Nicolas is going, we talked about it just the other day. The big picture is this. We now have proven that the people of Guam can, over a 20-year period, borrow about $650 million and have rates that we'd love them to be a little lower, but they're between $60 and $90 a month, residential, if you're on the sewer line. Almost half our water customers are not on the sewer line, so take away $30 from that 60 to 90. People like my mom, she's only paying my mom's not here, but Amanda's now only paying $30 to $40 a month, right? So you got so when some of these things, when you look at these costs, some of these, you're looking at only, these quotes that Greg gave you are for those that are on water and sewer. If you're not on water and sewer, your 60 and 80 is down $30. It's more like 40 and $50. So the people of Guam have we've had to increase their rates between 2004 and now in order to raise $650 million. But here's what I hope, my big picture, what we're trying to do. We now will pay this back over 30 years. We've got rates that are tolerable. Maybe we can beat them up and try to get them a little lower. But I think one of the things that we're going to challenge these guys, and we're going to challenge EPA, because EPA has another list they're creating, to say the people of Guam have borrowed more than enough. At these rates, we can borrow $650 every 30 years and pay them back over 30 years. So I'm hoping we can figure out for the next master plan or whatever EPA wants to do, say, look, you got to let us pay back some of this $650 before you ask us to spend any more money. Because this is all the people of Guam can afford. Every 30 years, borrow about $600, put $500 million in the ground. My hope is if we do our job right with fixed asset management, better training, that our children and grandchildren and your children and grandchildren won't have to come up with another $500 million in 30 years. I mean, that's the big thing, is to make sure we don't repeat the sins of the past. We've got a new lot on life. It's not free. It's been painful for us. Our ratepayers have sacrificed. But now we have proven that we can borrow about $650 every 20 years. We need 30 years to pay it back. But after 10 years, your $650 is down to $400. Maybe for whatever reason, Guam grows. We don't know. Guam needs $50, $75 million 10 years from now. Existing rates can service that debt. So the whole trick of utility financing and rates is to get the rates to a level that it services ops and debt, and as you pay back that debt, when you need to borrow more money, you just reborrow at a later time after you've repaid some debt. So
maintain the rates.
So I'm hoping we've got the rates to a level, where you're not going to, I don't see us, repeating the last 15 years of rate increases that we had to do now, because we don't need a new $650. We got $650. And now we're paying back some of the $650 already. So
The important-
over time, we can create space in the borrowing side that is serviced by current rates and mitigate, reduce, eliminate, future rate hikes. But there's no reason in my mind that future rate hikes need to look like the last 15 years. We don't need to borrow 1.3 billion. 500 to 600 seems to be working for us. It's all a community can absorb. It's all a community can build. That's going to be one of our arguments with EPA when they come up with a new list. They say, hey, we paid for the first list, let us absorb it. And when we can afford more, we'll do more.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sanchez. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. This is specifically for Mr. Berdalio. Mr. Berdalio, how many of the 59 full-time employees are new positions being added to your overall workforce at GWA?
So the 59 are all new positions.
They're all going to be new.
Not new in terms of new job descriptions, but new employees. Based on my initial analysis, over the probably past 8 to 10 years, there's been a steady decline in the number of technical positions. There's been some growth in the administrative and finance side, which is reflected in our financial performance. We put more resources at it, and we've improved. On the operations and technical side, there's been a decline of about 25% of our technical workforce. So the 59 positions, in large part, are intended to rebuild what we have lost over the years, and they aren't all being hired at one time. We've staggered them out. So many in the first quarter, so many in the second quarter of the fiscal year. And in fact, it's been difficult for us to fill the positions because of our certification requirements and so on and so forth. So we're even behind schedule on what we've allocated those positions by quarter. So we're working to fill them, but they will all be focused primarily on most of them will be focused primarily on operations and technical side.
Okay. And I know that in the past, the CCU has also been an advocate to train the in-house employees, in certain areas, so also they can move up the ladder, right? So are you still implementing this process, especially with the new hirees?
Absolutely. We've, when I came on board, we formed a task force that provides their objective was to provide a structured program for training within each position. You have worker 1, worker 2, leader, supervisor. And so within that position, what are the technical skills that you need to advance up the chain, and also what are the soft skills and the management skills that we want to see you have, so that when you reach the leader and supervisor position, you're well equipped to manage and keep our efficiencies. So that program is ongoing. We've got a new personnel training specialist, and she's taking the lead on that. We've established for 1 or 2 of the series what these requirements are, and we're focusing our training efforts to knock those out, and we're giving our employees the opportunity to take that training, and we're letting them know if you're in this position for 5 years, we expect you to be at worker 2 position, and these are your skill sets.
So you provide the training for them, for the workers in-house?
We established a training program,
okay,
and then whether it
they
comes from
follow
in-house or out-house or out of the house, we provide it as we see fit.
Okay, and these 59 full-time employees, these are all local hire?
That's the intent.
Okay.
And we've had discussions with UOG and Wary in trying to, UOG's setting up their College of Engineering. I'm trying to see if we can get some cooperative agreement about it, having a 2-year engineering technician program, and then rolling those people into GWA on an internship basis where they go to school, but then they take a semester and they do some work for us. And then when they graduate from that position, they've experienced, they've got some time under their belt, and they're able to take the certifications exam quicker.
So you're creating a pipeline. Okay.
That's the intent. We've had some initial discussions with Weary, and it's promising, and we're pushing to develop it and implement it.
So you're going to make it happen.
I'm trying to.
He will. Okay, that's on the record. So GWA agrees that the increase in salaries and benefits should be limited to 3% annually. Have you adhered to this limitation? And this is in your joint stipulation with the Loomis.
I don't know if I can answer that question.
Mr. Cruz, maybe? In the joint stipulation Loomis report, GWA agrees to do a 3% annual increase in salaries and benefits. Has GWA?
I think that stipulation revolves around the 5-year rate plan. So in other words, when we get into stipulations, we enter in a 5-year rate plan, projected rate plan,
Yes.
and then we agree to certain things. But once the 5-year rate plan is done,
Yes, so has
then-
it been done? Because we are in the
we are-
5-year
we are-
rate plan,
we
right?
are- We are sticking to that.
So-
But what I want to tell you is, we at the same time will review
Mhm.
our manpower cost and also how much we pay our people,
Mhm.
because we want to retain the people,
Yes.
and we want to encourage them to do better. So we are going to start studying, both GPA and GWA, do another study of wage rates that we pay and where we should be going.
So you have met the 3% annually?
Oh, yeah. No, for this rate plan, yes.
Yeah.
But I just wanted you to understand that as we finish the rate plan, as we go forward, that stipulation was revolved around the rate plan. It doesn't
Yes,
continue.
it will change.
Yeah.
I
No,
understand.
we're going to do what we need.
Okay. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the meter replacement program. Okay. I understand that the meters were replaced since 2003, and there was some issue with the meters. It was faulty, and now maybe they had to be changed once or twice out, right? Since 2003. Do you guys have an estimate of or a number of how many meters were changed out and how many times they were changed out? And this is leading to because in our previous discussions, some of the non-revenue water was attributed to the inaccuracy of the meter reads. So this is why I'm asking the question.
The initial issues that we had with the meters revolved around their premature failure in Guam's, based on Guam's water quality in the environment and the operating condition of our system. And GWA experienced a massive meter failure and underwent a complete meter replacement program. So for all of our 42,000 accounts, roughly, the decision was made to move to a different meter that was more reliable. Out of those 42,000, I think I can count the number of meters left that need to be replaced on one hand. So we're practically done. The few meters that are left are large commercial meters. The valves that service those accounts are non-functioning, and so in order to change those out and complete our replacement program 100% requires a significant outage, and so operations is just not in such a rush to take care of those last 2 or 3. But we're practically done with that meter replacement program. Now, with regards to there is a certain amount of failure that will occur in any type of meter that you put in, and any utility should expect having to replace a certain percentage of meters as part of their normal operations. Things break, things wear out. Each meter has an anticipated service life. So our current meter inventory and our policy on meter replacement program takes that into consideration. We maintain an adequate inventory, and when we do have issues with meters, either because a consumer comes in and complains or disputes a bill, and then we go and pull the meter, or just as part of our QA/QC program, where we take a certain percentage of meters out of service to check and verify their condition as a regular part of our ongoing operations. All of those instances will determine what we keep in inventory and how many meters we replace in a year. And I don't have a percentage at the top of my head, but I can provide you with the percentage that we anticipate or have been replacing on an annual basis, or try to do it by month. But I'll give you a rough idea of the meters in service. What percentage do we have to replace just for those issues? But the bottom line is and Greg can confirm this, in terms of our revenues and the numbers that we see, we have a high level of confidence with the current meters that we're using as opposed to what was in place before that we had to take out of service.
Okay, thank you. And your water audit comparative report says that now, well, in 2015, the inaccuracy of water loss due to meters is at now 0.5% in 2015. Is that correct?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but you're probably correct, Senator.
Okay. And the Loomis report, joint stipulation, projected sales of water should result in a 12% increase in sales in FY 2016. Is there a corresponding water sales increase due to the water meter program?
Senator?
Can you speak into the mic, Mr. Cruz? Thank you.
No, I didn't. What I saw from the meter replacement, the massive meter replacement program started back in 2013, is I saw consistency in sales. Prior to the meter replacement program, sales data here was very sporadic. I mean, I saw sales annually as low as 5.7 billion gallons a year. I've seen it as high as 6.2, 6.3. But since the meter replacement program, I've seen sales consistently 14, 15, and 16 fiscal year at around 6 billion gallons. So I see that's what I'm seeing. The benefit that in that meter replacement program is sales data are reliable, consistent.
Thank you. So I guess that also answers the benefit of the new meters now, right? They're more accurate, and the revenue increase was a result of GWA and the consumers installing the new meters.
The revenues went up because the rates went up.
Thank you.
As Greg just said.
There we
Well, I
go.
mean, we're not trying to fool anybody.
Right.
When the meters, Greg was just said, we had 5.7 billion gallons sold in an annual year with meters that were questionable. It only went up to 6 billion, 300 million. It only went up a very small percentage when we had good meters in. So the reason revenues went up, and are you reading the Lummis report from 2013, or what year are you reading?
This Loomis report is from
It's the stipulation for 13, right?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
so that's Lummis's best. All of us made a guess in 2013 as to what we thought the world would be like by 2018. So when we said, based on all these assumptions,
Yes.
and when he says sales, is he talking dollars or kgals? Because we look at both.
Yeah.
We look at how many billion gallons do we sell the community every year, and we look at the rates that we charge for selling that, and we look at the revenues that result from charging those rates for that amount of water sold to different classes of customers. And it will produce more sales revenue. It didn't produce 16% or 12% more billable gallons.
Yes.
It much less than that, 6%, 5%. 300. It went up 300 million gallons. So
Did you find? Thank
So
you,
you're
Mr.
reading a
Sanchez.
report. So you're reading a report that was even Lummis's guess in 2013. The reason they agreed to the rate plan.
Right, which is why I'm asking the question
Right.
now, because you guys have the facts for
now we have the
current.
reality
Yes.
is. So when you say
That's why I'm
sales went
asking.
up, are they talking about kgals or
in
revenues?
a question in revenue.
Okay,
Yeah.
so revenue. So it didn't had nothing to do. So as you can see, the answer to the question is. Sales revenue went up because of rate increases, not
Yes.
because the meters started billing 1 billion more gallons a year to people because they
Okay.
were more accurate.
Right. Thank you. Yes. Sorry. I'm trying to.
I know, but trying to keep it in context so that
Okay.
we communicate information.
Yes. What was when the meters were installed? Did it decrease your workforce? Because now you have the smart meters, right? So before we used to have PUAG.
Well, we had a contractor put them in first, and then we decided to put in, when we started replacing them and moved to a different vendor, we decided to put them in. We didn't outsource it.
So did it decrease the workforce now that we have the smart meters as far as in operations?
I'm going to clarify that they're not smart meters in the same sense that perhaps you're thinking GPA has
Okay.
smart meters. All it does is eliminates the manual
Right.
reading and writing and then transposition of numbers. So
Right.
now we still have to send the
drive
same
by
amount of
it.
people drive by, and if there's they
So
ping
you
it.
still have the same amount of people just drive by and ping each meter.
But it's faster
Okay.
and more efficient,
Okay.
more accurate.
Just a couple more questions, and we should be done for the evening. the line replacement project phase, because you submitted the line replacement plan, and we're at phase 4 now, right, for GWA?
That's correct.
So in that phase, it says that the line replacement is funded by 2013 bond funds. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. The explanation of the line replacement project cites portion of $10 million a year of a internally revenue funded CIP projects can be allocated. Does the current water rate generate internally funded CIP to the extent of $10 million a year?
That's yes, that's what we're seeing,
Okay.
but not all of it is, not all of it will be put towards the line replacement program. There are other internally funded CIP projects that we'd like also to apply those funds to.
Okay. And you have a plan. You're probably developing the plan, or you have the plan for that now, for the internally funded projects for the CIP?
Well, it's a pot of money that we have available for us to use. The plan that we are developing, the master plan update, will lay out what we anticipate our projected capital improvement needs will be over the planning period, and then once we have that in place, then we look at that to see what we have available to and when we can execute those projects.
But if you review the CIP plan that we gave you,
Yes.
you'll see that there's projects that are going to be funded by internal cash flow. And this speaks to, I think maybe this is the balancing act that Senator San Nicolas was hoping for. With internally financed, in the rates, we do generate a little profit for internally financed projects. But what we like about that is there's no interest. We're not running to a bank. We're not paying fees. So part of our rate design for both power and water is to give the utility a little cash flow from ratepayers, so to do internally financed projects like line replacements, right? In GPA, it's line extensions. A new account wants some telephone poles. We just do that for them. But we don't have to run to a bank. And I think that's some of that balancing act that the senator was speaking to. But how do you avoid interest on interest, and how do you avoid interest at all? Well, in our rate design, we finally got GWA where we got GPA to a while ago, where they're not just building stuff from debt. They've got a little cash flow, $7 to $10 million a year. If you look at and every year he updates the CIP plan, the latest one we adopted last October, November. You read it through to 2018, 19, 20. He's got projects that are funded by internal cash flow. But it's not all line replacement.
And there are other funds that we try to maximize without borrowing, such as the SRF grants that we do receive. And for BPA, and the total amount of the grants that we receive or the annual amount that we've been receiving for the past few years, there was a little bit of a halt on those funds, and then they've been releasing, and we've been getting more and more grant funds every year. So we hope to continue to do that.
Is this tied to the stipulated court order? This
No,
money from EPA?
cannot be used on
Okay,
those
so it's
projects.
specifically for CIP,
Well, they're grant funds that can be used for CIPs, among
other things. Okay. Yes, sir.
Internally funded funds. One of the other major benefits I see in it is we're not subject to any rate covenant.
Right.
The 1.25, 1.75. So that's one of the major advantages I see when we don't borrow. We're not stuck, we're not bound to any rate covenant.
And we have roughly about $11 million in that now. Yes. Okay, thank you. The bonds versus internally financed CIPs, which is better? Of course, we discussed that it's the internally financed CIPs, right? Naturally.
Cheaper, but it's not fast enough to build $500 million in projects by 2020.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the key. That's the battle. We could do everything the senator says.
Right,
We didn't have to meet the timeline.
But not all the money that you are going out to borrow specifically addresses the projects under court order.
All the projects under the court
No,
order.
Mr. Berdalio said,
All the projects under the court order are funded through the bonds.
but the bonds that you're going to borrow next does not cover everything under the court order.
Covers the remaining projects we have to fund
On top
that are
of-
in the court order that have to be done by 2021. So remember,
But does it also cover other projects as well that are not in the court order?
Yeah.
Okay,
But
that's
the
exactly what
overwhelming
I'm saying.
majority, the overwhelming majority
Right, but-
is court-ordered.
But we're still going, it's not only for court-ordered projects.
And
Right.
we don't always want to be pursuing capital improvement projects because we have a court order. We want to get to the point where we're doing things proactively and getting ahead of US EPA.
Yes, okay. In the last informational briefing, it was noted there were $15 million in reserve. And so does that correspond to the numbers that we talked about earlier with the reserves of O&M, debt,
More than
and,
You already answered that.
yes, I'm just clarifying.
As stated earlier, Senator, I stand corrected on the number I provided at the last meeting. I believe I gave like around 25 million.
Yes, yes,
And tonight I gave you.
35.
Yes.
Okay, very good. And then can we talk about fire hydrants a little bit?
Yes.
Okay. In attachment 1, from February 3rd, 2017, your plan to address non-revenue water item number 5 is hydrant repair and replacement program. Okay, fire hydrants are required of GWA by Title 5 GCA, Section 56-120 and 56-121. It shows that you plan to replace 400 out of 3,000 hydrants. And you're adding dedicated staff to this. Is this correct?
Yes, that's correct. 400 is the initial, what we've already purchased and we have ready to put into service.
And did I understand it correctly that the reason why you were addressing it was because of leaks?
No, that's not the entire reason why, but in replacing our worst fire hydrants, the initial batch of 400 of our most critical, our high priority ones, in replacing those, we will be addressing a portion of the distribution system that potentially could have leaks, and that's, there's a benefit to that, an added benefit to doing that.
And is this cost, the cost of the project, is that coming out of the ratepayers, or is Guam Fire Department paying for it?
So we'll tell you a wonderful story now that you'll appreciate now that you're a senator and Senator St. Nicholas already understands this. When we took over in 2002, Fire Department owed us $10 million for 12 years of not being appropriated by law, $800,000 by the legislature to the fire department to pay GWA for fire hydrants. So we walked in with a $10 million receivable for an appropriation that never happened, never existed. We knew the fire department, and we weren't going to turn off the water, and we realized everybody benefits from having fire hydrants. You got to have fire hydrants. And we also started requiring all new development to put in proper fire hydrants. So GWA ratepayers, as opposed to GovGuam taxpayers, have taken over the responsibility of maintaining fire hydrants for the community. If it was like it used to be, then Senator St. Nicholas for the last few terms and you this term would have to figure out a way to appropriate money to the fire department to pay GWA, and back then it was $800,000 a year. You imagine what it might be today. In fact, I'm guessing, just from my experience, it's probably cheaper. Us doing it internally is cheaper than you appropriating money to the fire department to give it to us. We're figuring it out. We absorb it as a cost of providing security of our water system to our people and to fight fires when they need it fought, but relying on the fire department to give us money to go buy hydrants, we just said forget it. We're going to deal with it. We stopped asking for the legislature to appropriate it. We stopped threatening to turn off the water to the fire department that never had the money. So that's why, yes, the GWA ratepayers pay for water, fire hydrant, because GovGuam taxpayers struggled, were never able to.
And thank you for that.
Can I just add one thing on that? Also, what we're doing is in doing the replacement of fire hydrants, we're correcting some problems that we found. Somewhere in the past, somebody decided to buy some dry fire hydrants that work really well in Minnesota and Wisconsin, but
They're not
don't
in
work
Guam.
well out here in Guam. They're meant so that, the dry fire hydrants, so that you can use them in a cold place, the water won't freeze in them. And that doesn't work here. So these are a lot of things that we found from prior years.
Thank
from
you, Mr.
PHE.
Duenas. How much will the fire hydrant replacement cost? Yes.
We're working on that right now. We're putting together the details that are required, plans and specs that would be required for the replacement, and we were intending to put out the initial batch of replacement work, and so we don't have an estimate yet, but ballpark we believe we're looking at about maybe 5,000 for the replacement part, and then the
Per hydrant?
per hydrant, and then the material cost for that, for the hydrants themselves and the fittings and so on. So
And you're adding, and I'm sorry, I forgot, that you're adding dedicated staff to this. You're
the dedicated staff is that we're adding is so that moving forward we have dedicated staff to maintain part of the asset management that we're pursuing. So it's going to be a small crew who will be responsible for the maintenance of the hydrants, and then monitoring them and then reporting any leaks and
only
taking
for the
care of those.
hydrants.
That's right.
How many were you?
The initial crew is only going to be two guys, two
Okay.
employees.
And then there was a concern about hydrants not being painted in accordance with the public law. What is the issue there?
I don't know where that concern came from, but hydrants are supposed to be painted a certain color,
Concerned citizen.
a certain color based on their output. So, as we go through that will be part of what the hydrant maintenance crew will be doing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's move over to system development charges. How is it generated first? And then do you have a copy, or can you get us a copy of how the system development charges are determined, aside from what you provided us?
The PUC adopted a rate. We proposed a rate. They analyzed it, and then first off, the legislature passed a law to create a system development charge. Then we petitioned for a system development charge rate. A study was done by us. Then PUC had their consultants beat it up, and what came out was a system development charge rate for water and sewer, and that's how the rate that currently exists was established.
And how do you use this system development charge? How is it used?
It's supposed to be for system expansion. Make a bigger water tanks, drill new wells, make increase capacity, as opposed to I'm not sure it's line replacement per se. Although you can, if we end up increasing the capacity, which we are replacing quite a number of lines and making them bigger.
To the
Chairman's
6-inch, correct?
Yeah, Chairman's right.
So the system development charges come from like maybe people that are building new homes,
Or structures or businesses.
right?
Anybody
And-
that's hooking up that needs water or sewer services needs to pay a system development charge
Does
for
it
their
go-
structure.
And does the system development charge, is it focused like towards the village? Like say I build my house in Barragata and then you use that money to help
No.
with the piping in Barragata? Nothing like that? You just use it
Well,
on what is most priority?
I'll tell you the layman's version. 100 wells pump up water and it goes to lots of people. So if we add another well, it's hard to say that well only went to Barragata, or that well was for Mrs. Cruz's new structure in Tamuning, right?
Right.
The whole idea is if 500 people add a structure in a 5-year period, they're going to need more water, and they're going to need to flush. There's more toilet flushing that occurs. 10 years later, you have 1,000 more people. And this is what happened to Guam. We didn't have a system development charge. We just kept adding customers, but no one was paying to make the capacity bigger, and you end up running up into what turned out to be the 2002 court order saying you can't service your customers, you got to do something.
Well, the reason why I'm asking this is because the system development charge is generated specifically from those that want to build, right? Even as simple as a home. And so some of the concern is they are now required to put a 6-inch line. And another situation is the 6-inch line is here, their property is over here, but then there's a 2-inch line that runs in between the entry point of the 6-inch line and then where their property is. So essentially, they're still required to put in this 6-inch line, and there's this existing 2-inch line for the property owners who are not building, and the consumer A has no idea who these property owners are, or even if they do plan to build, and so here they are expanding also on the other end. So you have a 6-inch a 2-inch and then maybe a 4-inch. I don't know. It's a 4-inch line for connected to the house. And so that was one of the consumer concerns is these system development charges are we allocating it to go back to service the communities and the specific villages and so forth, but the answer is you're using it for everything across to improve the system.
First off, you're confusing the 6-inch line is a requirement of building the structure. The system development charge is on top of that. In other words, for you to hook up your house, a residential house, to our system, we have learned that 2-inch lines don't work. 2-inch lines is why you have 53%, whatever the hell our water loss is, right? Your grandfather's house was built with a 2-inch line.
You can't service a fire hydrant from
With
a
a
2-inch
2-inch
line.
line. So all new development, we started this when we took over, said, look, we got to bite the bullet. You got to get to 6-inch lines, or else we're just going to perpetuate what we already got. 2-inch lines that can't fight fires, and after the 20th person hooks up to the 2-inch line 15 years later, Grandpa wonders, how come I don't have pressure? I had pressure 20 years ago.
Do you have a count or a number of how many fire hydrants you've had to use within the years that have not been available? Like if there's a fire, right, and I'm a firefighter and I hook up the house, how reliable?
We have a total of almost 3,200 fire hydrants island-wide.
And how many have you used?
We don't use them, the fire department uses them.
Right, or how many have been used?
We don't. That data's not tracked. But what I can tell you is that the initial purchase of the fire hydrants that we are scheduling for replacement were intended to address the 400 the most critical out of all those. So if you're, from our perspective, 400 is a number right now that we know we need to replace, either because they are performing substandard or they are the wrong type and we need to replace the
Are
dry
they all
type.
metered now? Are all the 3,200 fire hydrants metered?
No.
So there's part of your water loss, right? There's non-revenue water. We know fire hydrants are being used. People fight the fire. The fire department fights the fire. There's no meter on it. So there's an example of water that is non-revenue water being used, but no one's paying for it.
Okay, thank you.
You're going to use the wastewater system.
Thank you,
Good.
Madam Chair. I do have
Use
actually
the revenue.
I have a line of questions that kind of built up over the course of our conversation and just me listening very carefully, and so I just like to go through the motions and just ask them. Starting off with just to kind of lay the foundation. So we discussed earlier tonight that the water system, not the wastewater, but the water system had a $29 million operating profit as reported by the OPA, but it had a $26 million thereabouts debt service
The
cost.
whole company.
The whole system.
The
Okay.
whole company.
So the whole system had a $29 million operating profit, but a $26 million debt cost. And then in 2014, 2015, and 2016, because of the meter replacement program, we've gotten to a point where we've had 6 billion. We've been able to record consistent use of water at a rate of 6 billion gallons sold for those years. And the reason why revenues went up was because the rates for that water that was produced went up. And earlier it was mentioned that rates went up to fund $650 million of borrowing.
Well, we haven't borrowed the last 70 million. We
The last
borrowed
70.
580 of 650.
So we have to fund $580 million of borrowing. So just to recap, revenues went up because rates went up, revenues on the water side, because rates on the water side went up. And those water rates went up to fund the borrowing.
Water and wastewater rates were increased.
Water and wastewater rates.
Both were increased.
Okay, so on the water rate increase, now water accounts for 70% and wastewater 30% of revenue, right?
Something like that.
Okay. But
It's 60-40 me. I'm looking at the 2016. 67 million in water on $105 million of revenue. 39 million in wastewater. So it's 60-40 maybe?
okay, 60-40.
Something like that.
Okay. 60-40 for the rates.
The
now
revenue split. The revenue
split, right.
The rates are assessed across the board.
across the board.
Right. We just say if it's a 10% water rate increase, the rate for water goes up, the rate for wastewater goes up
Right.
10%.
when water rates increase, there is a piece of your wastewater rates for residential that's considered a lifeline rate. So if, for example, this year, wastewater rate for residential customers all went up. But the year before, 15, 14, and 13, because the lifeline rates didn't go up, so your wastewater bill wasn't affected by those rate increases. It was just the water side.
Just the water side?
Yeah.
Okay.
But correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, the water rate that we were charging people in 2004 is much lower than, I'm sorry, the wastewater rate that we were charging people in 2004 is much lower than the wastewater rate that we're charging today, correct? I'm sorry, higher. Today's rate is much higher than before, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's Greg is right on the margin that, yeah, the incrementally wastewater gets that benefit. But you look at it at a macro level, the water rate has gone up and the wastewater rate has gone up since 2004 by this whole series of rate increases mitigated by lifeline rate adjustments.
Right.
But we don't want to give the impression that only the water bill went up. Everything went up.
Everything went up. Okay. Did the rates go up proportionate to the services that were provided? So, for example, we borrowed $580 million, and it was stated earlier that 45% of the borrowing was for wastewater facilities. So, did the cost of that $580 million borrowing, did 45% of that cost be applied strictly to the wastewater rate?
We don't do it that way. We take gross revenues and subtract gross debt service.
But so it was applied across the board to all ratepayers.
Right, because at the end of the day, as we said, it's about a 55-45 split between water and wastewater projects. So I appreciate from the first hearing when we weren't here, you had a good line of questioning, and I was thinking about it myself in the math. Again, the debts are, if it's 55-45 water to wastewater, the ratio on $520 million, I mean, then you could argue that the water bill should have gone up a little more than the wastewater bill, right? But it's almost 50-50. I think when you do the math, or when I did the math, the impact, I think I was talking to a consumer, would have been like $1 a month, on their $60. Their water bill would go down $1 and their wastewater bill would go up $1, something like that. That it's an interesting question, it's an interesting exercise, but at a macro level, it will have minimal impact on rates.
I'm just curious because it was also mentioned that half of our customers are not on the sewer line.
Mm-hmm.
And so the residential, right, the residential. And so
So they don't even get a sewer charge.
Right.
Right. So in many ways, it's the fact that their water bill, my mom's water bill went up, the fact that 55% of the debt service and the projects are in water, I'm okay that my mom's water bill went up because she's benefiting from the fact that most of that project is funding water. But she's also cross-subsidizing those that are on the sewer system, because she's paying a little more than she should have, because if you did the actual split.
Right.
She is cross-subsidizing those that are on the sewer line.
Right.
So, again, when you're trying to do the right thing, in a perfect world, you'd love to have it down to the millimeter, to the third decimal of dollars, but I think at a macro level, which, many times, like you in the legislature, you have to kind of look at it macro. You can't worry about not $100 at DOE when you're worried about $300 million budget request. So at a macro level, you are having those ratepayers that don't use sewer, they are paying a bit of a cross-subsidy because their water bill is going up, and some of that water bill is funding some of the wastewater. But it's 55-45. It's not like it's 80-20, right? It is pretty close. So again, we could go and lower everybody's water bill that doesn't have sewer and raise everybody's water bill that does have sewer, or we could just average it across everybody. And that's what
Can
the
I just
PC
make
and
a
us
point,
chose
though?
to do.
No, I need to make a point, though, Senator. The people who don't have sewer connection and only have water connection, they still use the sewer system.
Mm-hmm.
Because every once in a while, their septic system has to be pumped.
Right, but most likely when they
Right.
pump it, the
Mhm.
guy who pumps it has to go and pay a fee to dispose it.
No. The guy
But
who
he
pumps
charges
it.
the customer.
Wait,
Right.
wait.
So your mother does
Wait.
pay for it.
Right,
Okay, wait. You got to understand something.
So you're going to pay for
Let me-
sewer disposal one way or the other.
right.
Just a minute. Don't get excited. What you have to understand is the pumping company will charge the homeowner and say, I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to take it to GWA. And then he's going to tell you that, yeah, he pays GWA something to drop it off, right? The amount of money he pays to drop it off is not really to do the treatment and all that other stuff. It's to provide the connection and the facilities with which he drops it off. It's not to pay for the sewage treatment of the volume that he drops off.
But that's a GWA issue.
No,
GWA should be assessing the proper throughput fee.
No. You're missing my point. The pumping company, of course, will charge the homeowner for the fact that he has to pump it, he has to use his truck, he has to use his people and bring it over. And he does charge the homeowner for something that he is going to pay to GWA to hook up and to dump it in. But that payment he makes is not to treat the sewage that he dumps off.
Right.
It's to make the facility that allows him to dump it off, because you have to comply with EPA nowadays. So he has to pay for that. So that is a charge that the pumping truck has to pay to hook up, to be able to hook up. He just doesn't drop it into the pool.
So Tan Maria is actually subsidizing the pumping company
no.
also.
No. That's a charge that has to be paid, because that's a cost. That's a valid cost. But for the treatment of the volume that's dropped in, the sewage, the septage that is dropped in there, that is treated and paid for by the cost of GWA. And so that's why some of that water rate does pay for that sewer treatment. And I got to tell you, in all the stuff that I've read and everywhere I've gone and learned more and more about sewer, more than I should, the septage pump that you pump in is worse than what comes from the sewer.
You know, I grew up in the South, and my house, I think I pumped it twice, over the course of my short lifetime. But for me to be paying a higher water rate in order to subsidize a greater sewage expense for the overall island, I mean, for those residents, for those 50% of all residential customers, that's half of everybody who lives in a home. For 50% of all those residential customers to be paying even a slightly higher charge for a service that they're not using, I think needs to be revisited. I think that's something that can go back and be looked at again, because that all adds up over time, and for consumers to be having to pay for that, I think is something that is questionable. My other question that I wanted to ask on top of all of this is, the lifeline rate goes up when costs go up 20%, and that's inclusive of water and wastewater, right?
Of everything, power, debt service,
everything, right?
Labor.
But that's inclusive of the water and wastewater components of GWA. But if I'm a lifeline customer on a septic system and I don't use sewer and the sewage costs are going up, my lifeline rate is going to increase on a cost that I'm not even incurring on the system.
So that's, like I said, there is some cross subsidy going
Right.
from the water users to the wastewater users.
Well, just to be very clear, the cross-subsidy is going from everyone 50% of the residential customers on septic tank to everybody else on the sewer system.
Yeah, there's some, and there's a huge cross subsidy coming from the commercial sector and the government to residential. So you raise a good point, and it's something you can bring up to the PUC and ourselves, that as we look at future rate design, we can look at these things. But if you go to pure cost of, because if you go to pure cost of service, I think many of your points are valid, right? The challenge will be then, okay, so do we go to those 23,000 that are on sewer and say, by the way, now I need to raise your rate this much more, and I go to the other 23,000 and I'm going to lower it this much.
It's not so much about the perceptions; it's about just charging people what they're what they're using.
But
I mean,
the reality is, we're going to have to explain to sewer customers why their bill just went up, because we just reduced non-sewer customers, and you just have to explain it. Maybe they'll like it, maybe they won't like it. But it's all I'm saying is there's trade-offs in every rate decision you make.
Right.
We cross-subsidize now. If we went to pure cost of service, the hotel rates would plummet and the home rates would go up. But these two old guys back in the 80s and 90s realized one thing for both power, and we applied it to water. We got 1.5 million tourists that the commercial community sells to, right? And the military, who buys our wastewater service. I want to export some of this burden to them. So we purposely designed rates that did allow the commercial and the government to subsidize the residential, because we're trying to keep the homeowner bill down. Yeah, it costs us more to go to the Hilton, but if you can afford to go to the Hilton, then you can afford to pay a little more for water. And those 1.5 million visitors that are coming, I definitely want them to help pay. So let's Now, in perfect rate setting, we should lower the hotel rate and raise the residential rate.
No,
Do you want us to
it's
do that?
actually it's actually the opposite.
No, it's
You
not.
should raise the hotel rate sewage costs so that you can lower the residential
No, the hotel
septic
rates
tank
are already
amounts.
No, the hotel,
because
the
their
commercial
water,
community
like you
already
said
spends
earlier,
more.
is subsidizing the sewage system.
Senator, no.
As a matter of fact, those hotels are the
cur-
biggest impactor on the
No,
sewage
you're
system.
wrong. 40,000 people using the toilet has a major impact on wastewater. And
Right, but
40,000
they're-
people
but they're-
needing
but-
water,
but the
then
ones
getting
who are
water
on the
to
sewer
100
system-
structures.
The ones who are on the sewer system are paying for a service that's being provided. The ones that are on septic are subsidizing that sewer system.
A little.
Right.
So, I mean, and you know,
I guess,
neither wrong
Senator,
nor right.
one of the problems you have is that if you had a perfect world where you could perfectly allocate costs, one of the biggest things I've learned in all the time that we set rates back in 1985 is there's no perfect world where you can perfectly allocate every cost that you have.
I think that the agency has done a good job of being able to separate its costs for water and wastewater.
We have some
And so
basic
when we-
separation, but you cannot
When we
allocate.
borrow
you
specifically,
cannot
for example,
allocate
for
every-
wastewater projects.
But you cannot allocate. If you want to go really to a pure
Cost
rate
of
setting,
service.
cost of service, then the customer service in the front, the lady who's taking your payment, the lady who's working on your bill. No.
That will get charged to residential.
That person you have to split up how much of that hour was for wastewater here, how much is for this. You can't do it, Senator.
You have
So you have
your
the macro.
You're selling general and administrative costs of your central office.
You can allocate that.
Yeah, you can, and you can compartmentalize every single operational
Not-
expense.
not-
So it's
not
definitely
down-
doable.
not down
I
to
don't
the
think
level you
that
want.
the slippery slope of being able to say, well, we can't figure it out exactly, so just let it go. That makes
no.
me even less satisfied.
Well, so why don't we do this? Why
We
don't-
do try to allocate costs as best as possible,
Right.
but you're never going to allocate costs perfectly.
Here's
So
a-
we believe what we're doing is probably the best that you can achieve for our community, and it has worked.
But you're unable to quantify that.
Well, wait, I take it back. There was a cost of service study done when we were on the first PUC. That's how we got these rate structures. Now, this was GPA first because PUC didn't touch GWA till much, much later. But the preliminary cost of service studies that were done for GWA, right, will show you that, first off, the commercial rate should be much lower and the residential rate should be much higher. And we said, no. Let's let the commercial customers can raise prices. They're selling to 1.5 million tourists. The homeowner can't raise their salary. You know, they don't have control over that, right? So those are the. I mean, that's what.
I don't want us to confuse the issue. I have no problem with how you guys are allocating the commercial, the residential, or whatever. My only thing is, if you're going to charge somebody for sewer, make sure you're providing it to them. And if you're going to be building that into somewhat of their water costs, I don't think that you should be.
But then you want to get rid of all these cross subsidies, and I'm telling you, and maybe
No, that's not what I'm saying.
No,
I'm
but
saying,
that's exactly what you're saying. If you want them to pay pure cost, Senator, then the pure cost for residential, the rate should be higher.
No,
and the
what I'm
pure cost
saying
for
is-
commercial, the rate should be lower. And we'll show it to you. We'll do another cost of service
What I'm
study.
saying
Happy
is
to show it to you.
we should have a fair basis for everybody. So if you're commercial, this is what you pay commercial. If you're on sewer, this is what you pay on sewer.
And so how do you
If you're
determine
not
that?
on sewer,
Right.
this is what you pay when
So
you're
how
not
do you
on sewer.
determine that? You do a cost of service study. And the one that was done many, many years ago, and it needs to be updated, but
Before
I'm
all
like
of the-
Joey,
before
I don't
all-
sense the structure of Guam has changed
Before
much.
all of these rate increases to
Sure,
pay for these
yeah.
bonds,
Yes,
for
there-
these sewer systems
Long
that these
time
septic
ago.
tank residents are not using.
There was a preliminary cost of service study done many moons ago that laid out this structure. Now, I think you make a good point, and maybe it's timely for us.
Okay.
Maybe we can all revisit rate structure. Maybe we should all think about, all right, now that we're a very different company, very different circumstance, and we haven't done a cost of service study, well, maybe that may be a prudent suggestion. I'm open to that. We can look at it. Let's do a cost of service study, and then let's see what the numbers tell us. But I think what will happen is once you see the numbers, then the policy making gets in. Do you subsidize at all? Do you not subsidize at all? Lifeline rate? Does everybody get the lifeline rate or not? And then let's see what the numbers tell us, and then we can decide. It's unfair to you and it's unfair to us to speculate. We're speaking from just having done this for many, many, many years about the rate structure, but I'm open to revisiting the rate structure. The PUC has to be open to revisiting the rate structure, and you're going to have to do a cost of service study, which we would have to do. We'd take our money do a cost of service study, and see whether we should change the rate design. That's a very valid question. In fact, on the GPA side, we're doing all sorts of machinations thinking about rate design because of what's going on with renewables. But we can do that. At least we can kick it around, Mr. Chair. I'm willing to kick it around. Let's update it. You know, we're old fogies now. The world has changed. Maybe the cost of service structure will come out differently, but just from our experience, Guam still has about the same number of tourists it's always had. Yeah, it's gone up in recent years, but for a long time it was stuck at 1.2 million. One or two new hotels. The military has downsized. Residential construction has gone up a little bit in the last 15 years, but the economies were weak, right? So that's why our instinct is telling us when we do if we did another cost of service study, I don't think the structures, the rate design structures are going to change that much. You're going to find that commercial is still subsidizing. And if you want to change that subsidy, then somebody else's rate has to go up, so their rate can go down. And that's if you're pure cost of service. So that's when you say, Senator, if you charge everybody what it's supposed to be, you do open that Pandora's box about, well, commercial rates could go down, but then Maria's rates could go up.
And you know, I think that you're creating an unnecessary fear in a subject that I think is very valid.
No, if there's a subsidy going on now, Senator, and you eliminate the subsidy, someone else has to pick it up.
People paying for a service that they're either going to be receiving or not receiving.
Correct.
If a commercial rate is a commercial rate, and if that rate just so happens to be subsidizing the residential rate, and that's the policy, then that's the policy. But that doesn't mean that somebody who is a resident should be paying more for their water in order to subsidize somebody else who has sewer when they're not using the sewage system.
Well, no more than someone in the commercial. Why should my laundry pay for residential water costs? Why should I pay a higher rate? Why should a hotel pay a higher rate than it actually costs to serve them?
But
it's the same logic of what you just said.
But they're still receiving the service. It's
but
just
they're
at
paying
a higher rate.
more than it costs, just like you said.
The individual who is paying a higher rate for subsidizing sewage isn't receiving the sewer services. The key difference in the conversation is, in one scenario,
nor are they being charged for the sewer service, Senator. You're missing that point.
Okay,
they're not charged for sewer either.
No,
if you're not on the sewer, you don't pay GWA a sewer
No, but
charge.
what's happening is we've incurred all of these costs in order to upgrade the sewer system
and
that the customer is not using.
Well, I agree with the chair.
So why are we charging them
it.
more for something they're not using, period? That has nothing to do with whether commercial rates are higher than residential rates or whatever, and then going out there and trying to scare everybody saying we're going to lower commercial rates. That's not at all what I'm talking about. So let's be very, very clear. What I'm talking about is people paying for a service they're receiving or not charging them if they're not on the system.
Correct.
And
so if you're not on the sewer system, but we took out all these
then you're not paying
bonds
a
and
sewer
we
bill.
raised these rates in order to pay for an improvement of the sewer system, we shouldn't be making them pay for that. We really shouldn't, unless they're receiving the service.
Senator,
that's where we disagree with you.
Yeah, I think we have a disagreement because I will tell you that you're thinking that the water rate that a person pays who doesn't have a sewer connection is enormously higher and he's subsidizing somebody else. I would represent to you that based on the way we've tried to set this up, his rate is probably where it should be. The sewer rates are being subsidized more by the other people rather than the water rates. You're reading it wrong. I'll give you a good example. The commercial side is subsidizing more of those sewer costs rather than the water rate on the person who has no sewer. The sewer rates on commercial is volumetric. It's not as flat as it is for the sewer on the residential side. And so I would just suggest to you that I would not automatically look at our numbers and just do divisions and say, well, this should go down. I would recommend that you don't do that. I would suggest that that's not the case. The water rate for people who pay water, don't have a sewer connection, is probably just about where it should be. But, you know, you bring up a valid point, and I think it is time maybe to do a cost of service study, not just on GPA, but on GWA also. So we can do that. Yep. We'll work on that. Not a problem.
And we'll share it.
And we'll share it. We'll
see what it says.
We'll inform everybody on our results and where we're going to go with it. But, you know, I believe when we went back and we started this back in 1985, you know, this was our first stab at really setting rates. You know, I don't know if you remember back in 1985, but no, in 1985, yeah, you was probably born. But in 1985, water rates on the island were flat. People paid people paid $6 a month for their water bill. No. You were around. But what I'm saying is, back in 1985, people paid a flat rate for their water, $6. And if you had sewer, it was $8. So you paid $14. No, it didn't matter how much came through the pipe. Didn't matter. That's all it was. And when we started to get into the rate structure, I got to tell you, and we started to look at it and try and do exactly what you say. Well, this guy shouldn't pay for what this guy does. And we started to make movements. Boy, I tell you, we got a senator who immediately said, "You're not setting water rates anymore." Just it led us to a lot of trouble.
Just the other perspective, because there's another element to this whole conversation, and that is that when you're not on the sewer system, you have certain other limitations that prevent you from being able to realize the full value of your assets. For example, if you're on septic, you have to have a half-acre size property in order to accommodate a leaching field. If you're on the sewer system, you can break that down into a quarter-acre lot, build 2 houses, sell one. I mean, there's a lot of different implications that come into play here. So I really feel that when it comes to the topic of making sure that everybody's paying for what they're paying for, we need to understand that there are not only the upfront costs, but there are the inherent costs.
Okay,
and if we're going to be charging somebody for sewer, then let's make sure that they're having the service provided.
Okay.
And if they're not having the service provided, then we just really shouldn't be charging them for it. And that's basically where I'm coming from.
And Senator, I would just encourage you to review the land use laws on the island, because there are some situations where they're not quarter-acre or half-acre. You have what they call parental subdivisions, where people are allowed to subdivide a piece of property. You have one property and 5 kids, and they call it a parental subdivision, and they cut up the lots into 5 lots that are substandard, that are not half-acre, and they do septic things. So, I mean, it's not one size fits all. The laws on the land use of Guam allow for parental subdivision. I know because I've looked at it, I said, this is nuts. But that's the law. The point, Senator, is the fact that you saying that some people are disadvantaged because if they don't have a sewer system, they have to have a half-acre lot. And I'm telling you, that's not all.
That is generally the case.
But that's not all the case. And I will tell you, there are a lot of people out there who are doing what we call parental subdivision.
I feel like what you're trying to do is justify that what you're saying is right and what I'm saying is wrong because you have holes in facts. And I think that's really devolving the conversation, Joey.
I just wanted to say that there are other nuances to that. That's all.
Sure. No? But generally speaking, if you're going to have a septic tank, you need a half-acre lot. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, we're just about done. Just a couple more questions. This is in reference to the land acquisition. In the audit, 2016 audit, on page 35, it says that the real property has not been recognized in the financial statements pending completion of formal transfer proceedings. Go to page 35 in the audit that you submitted.
Okay.
And it's financial statement number 9.
Oh, okay.
Page 35.
Okay.
So can you explain
So in
why it's-
1998, I
okay.
believe this is what Public Law 23-119 does. You can verify, because I was in the 25th. This was done before me. So I think this is the law that made GWA an autonomous, public corporation autonomous agency. So in doing so, remember, it used to be under GovGuam, DPW. GovGuam owned all these assets. When it made GWA autonomous, the concept is all those water and wastewater assets now transfer to this new corporation. I think that this is simply referring to the fact that when GovGuam transferred all those assets, whatever they were in 1998, that the property has not been recognized in the financials, probably because it was pretty hard to value what the hell all that was.
Are you taking bonds out with these properties?
No. This
Okay.
is in other words, when GWA was taken from a line agency to a public corporation autonomous, it had to
Yes.
go, the assets that DPW was running for PUAG, that assets of PUAG, which were GovGuam, had to be moved to the public corporation. And all she's saying is, that was never for, they didn't say, okay, GWA knew, you now have $500 million of government PUAG assets, and we'll put it on your books.
So,
I believe that's what that is referring to.
yes, so why is it not complete?
I think because the idea, well, you should ask the auditors from back then. But as I read this, and I'll be happy to research it for you. But 25th was 2000, so the 23rd was like in 96 or 97, and GWA was autonomous in 98. And I think this is the law that made it autonomous. So it's transferring assets from GovGuam, PUAG to GWA, and I think whoever the auditor or however the accounting was done back then, they didn't say, let's reduce GovGuam assets, PUAG, by 50 million, and let's move it to GWA and make GWA jump by 50 million.
So,
I believe that they're saying these financial statements do not recognize the original assets that were transferred back in 1998.
and GWA is not responsible to survey this land?
No, we have it.
We have been.
Okay.
We have all of this.
And so,
But the
So
value
it's
is
not
not
complete.
on the books. That's all that she's
Yeah.
saying. The value of that land.
so
was
what
not
is
put
the
on books.
value of the land? Okay. We'll get that?
Well, we have to
Okay.
go get an
To the extent
appraisal.
that we have it, but I'm
Oh, so
saying.
it's not done? It's not
No,
done?
we don't have an appraisal of all of our
Okay,
property.
that's what I'm asking.
This was
Is
an
it-
intergovernmental transfer. It was frankly, it was done
Right, back
to
in
make
the
it
90s.
1998. It was
Okay.
done to make it simple.
Okay.
You didn't want, GWA wasn't going to write a check to
Right,
GovGuam
so it's
for
not
50 million.
complete, basically.
It's not a matter of not complete. It was just not accounted for. The transfer was complete. We control those assets. The transfer
Right.
was complete.
But the
We-
appraisal's not complete.
There was not a requirement for an appraisal. They just said, GovGuam said, I'm creating a new entity. It used to be PUAG. I'm going to pick up every asset of PUAG, move it over to the new GWA. Whatever its value is, the auditors back then didn't say GovGuam goes down 50 million and the new GWA jumps up 50 million. I'm 99% sure that's what that refers to.
I
On
suspect.
the real estate side.
I suspect that part of the reason why some of them the transfer may not have been completed is if, for example, it was wells that were drilled on government of Guam property that perhaps may have been unregistered. We can parcel out and do the survey for where our property is, but the registration process is something that would take a long time. So little discrepancies like that may be the reason why not everything has been completed. But
And because it was a cost-free transfer, GovGuam didn't bill the new GWA for the land, for the assets it was giving. It was a cost-free transfer. It's intergovernmental. That's why I think from the audit point of view, you're talking about a value that didn't cost the new GWA anything. They weren't invoiced by GovGuam and say, now you GWA owe me 50 million for all those assets I just gave you.
Right,
It was a
right.
no-cost transfer. It just occurred. You just created an autonomous entity and moved assets of line
Well-
agencies into it at no cost to the new entity, no benefit to the old entity.
But I think, Senator, if you want us to look at it, we'll be glad to look at it and try and see how we can establish costs for it. I don't know how we would do that. I guess one of the concerns would be, there would be a cost to do appraisals. And so in the grand scheme of things, I guess on the policy side, we would look at that and say, do we want to spend money appraising all this property and trying to get a cost we can put on the books?
Well, you have a
Or-
land acquisition status from your work session on February 15, 2017.
For land that we're acquiring,
For land
but
that
not
we're
for the land
acquiring.
that we got in 23-119,
have.
none of those assets.
But,
So-
it's something that we would certainly look forward to doing, but
Yes.
again, I don't know if we would make it a very urgent thing. I
Okay.
think we'd get around to it eventually,
Okay,
you know.
okay, thank you. And then just one last question. As will address the leak repairs. Are there known water leak where repairs are awaiting availability of a backhoe?
we do upwards of 300 leak repairs every month, and there's a continual rolling reported work orders that come in, and then reported work orders that are signed and completed, and we handle those as we have equipment available. There are some that require backhoes to complete, and if we don't have enough backhoes available to get it in that particular day, then it rolls over to the next day. So at any given time, there are going to be leak repair work orders that are pending equipment. Yes.
How many backhoes do you have currently working
I think we have a total of
that are fully functional?
6 in inventory, and I think we have 3 working at the moment.
3 working, okay. So you could fill 3 backhoes a day? You have the personnel to fill 3 backhoes a day, the ones that are working? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your time, Mr. Berdalio, Mr. Sanchez, Mr. Duenas, and Mr. Cruz. I appreciate it. The time is now 7:54. We will recess this informational briefing and continue at a later date to be announced. Thank you, and thank you to people of Guam for staying in.